Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana Smith was one of those girls who in Soviet times would have been described as a Komsomol girl, a student, an athlete, and simply beautiful. But since Adriana was born a year after the collapse of the Soviet Union, any Komsomol was out of the question. Everything else was pure truth. The girl studied at the psychological faculty of the university, respected sports, and not just respected, and in her free time went to the gym and conquered guys with her gorgeous figure and exquisite beauty. Her green, slightly slanted eyes put on associations with the witches Rusalka and Undina, and her waist-length golden brown hair completed the impression. There was no shortage of admirers, but the heart of the young beauty was taken in the first year of university. Its happy owner was James, a law student. The guy was a year older. "Bah, excuse me, can you tell me where the third bakery is?" He heard the melodious voice of a beautiful freshman one day and realized he was lost. "Come on, I'll show you," James offered with a smile, and the girl nodded gratefully. On the way to the bakery, young people met, and the same day realized that they were made for each other. After receiving his diploma, James got a job at the tax office. The salary was impressive, and the young specialist thought about making Adriana an offer. And why not? After all, after a year, James was already on his feet and therefore could provide for his family. "I will propose when James gets his diploma." He shared his plans with his parents, and they quite approved of his son's decision. They were fine with Adriana. "She's not a bride. She's a miracle," said Betty, James's mother. "She's a clever girl and a beauty and a good housekeeper. Don't you dare miss her." "I'm not going to," replied the son with a smile. It was done. Adriana received her diploma, and James made the girl an offer, which she gladly accepted. The young employee of the tax service decided not to save money on the wedding. The celebration was fun, crowded, and very beautiful. It seemed that there would be a lot of happiness ahead, but life often presents surprises, which, unfortunately, are not always pleasant. No matter how many spouses tried to conceive a child, they did not succeed. James and Adriana bypassed a lot of doctors, but all to no avail. The young woman became depressed. "Don't worry, kitten," James said. "I love you. And that's the most important thing. The rest will come." But then a lot of women have changed when they've lost all sense of Christina. So as long as we're alive, not all is lost. "Yes," Adriana smiled weakly. "You're probably right." She tried not to despair, but apparently she wasn't trying hard enough. One day, after another failed attempt to get pregnant, she'd snapped at James for the first time, even though she couldn't blame him. That night her husband didn't come home for the first time, and then things escalated. Adriana had no time to look back, and the spouses' sleepovers outside the house became a regular occurrence. In 3 months, Adriana came home and found in the marital bed a pretty blonde girl. It was a girl, because the latter is unlikely to have marked the age of majority too young. About such usually said young as early. Once Adriana sincerely thought that such situations are possible only in bad anecdotes, but not in life. Turns out she was wrong. No, she didn't make a jealous scene. Why humiliate herself? Oh no, that's not Adriana Smith. She just turned around and went back to her parents' house. A week later, James stood on her parents' doorstep. "I'm sorry," he said, handing Adriana a bouquet of tulips. "I don't know if I can," she replied, looking thoughtfully at her husband. "You try." Barely audible, James said. God knows she tried to appear calm, but she couldn't hold back the tears. Her husband held Adriana close to him and stroked her hair. Sha, it's okay." That same day, Adriana returned to James. The family idyll lasted exactly a month. That is, until Adriana, returning from work, accidentally saw her husband with her good acquaintance. James and Christina were sitting in a cafe holding hands. Adriana was tempted to run to the cafe. "Yeah," and pulling Christina's hair. "Yeah, and just as long as it didn't hurt. But after a minute, Adriana thought, no, we'll go another way. That evening, when they were both home, she said without offense that she'd seen the whole thing. Adriana had subconsciously hoped that James would say that it had been a chance encounter and purely friendly. But nothing of the sort had happened. Yes, her husband replied with a sigh. I should have told you about it earlier. Christina and I love each other. How long have you had this? Asked the young woman, Drogba in your voice. Not long, shrugged James. What difference does it make? Really no sobbing. And I don't remember myself running out into the street. And then there was a divorce with all the ensuing consequences in the form of the division of the apartment, the division of property, and the news of Christina's pregnancy. That was a low blow. Calm down. You're gonna be fine. Adriana's friend Kathy tried to talk some sense into Adriana. With such a beauty, you will not be alone for long. But Adriana just shook her head. She didn't believe anyone else. And in the back of her mind, somewhere in the very bottom of her mind, Christina glimmered that James would come back. But he'd forgotten all about Adriana. Her classmate Clara, who was not particularly tactful, said that James and Christina are happy, walking through the park, holding hands. And your ex was like a faithful dog, pouring it all over her face. Holding hands, she thought. Just like that time in the cafe. And out loud she said, Slaga, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Adriana worked as a school psychologist, but now she felt like a cobbler without boots. She herself needed the help of a specialist. So the principal suggested that Adriana take a week off. The young woman gladly accepted the offer. She went to the base where she walked a lot and read books. Of course, men tried to court her, but Adriana only guffawed. What's in store for the prince? The week flew by like a day. On the way back to the city, Adriana feared she'd be depressed again, but she didn't. She went back to work. Life went on as usual, and it seemed like an early start to life. But one day Adriana was walking down the street and saw Christina with a stroller. The young woman became hysterical. She sat down on a bench and began to scream. Are you sick? A man asked her sympathetically. About 25 years old. I think so, nodded Adriana. Only you don't have to worry about that. But why didn't the young man agree, handing her a small bottle of mineral water? We're all human. Sometimes it's good to talk it out. And a stranger would be better for that purpose than a best friend. Adriana remembered how Clara had poured salt on her wound. That was when she realized that the young man's words had some merit. Adriana also realized that she really needed to talk. After all, her friends didn't really care about her problems. But then, why should a strange man care about them? Well, he offered himself as a shoulder to cry on. By the way, my name is William. The man introduced himself with a smile. Adriana trustingly, she smiled back. So what is your problem, Adriana? William asked softly. It's just hard to imagine that such a beautiful girl could have serious problems. She could, she sighed, and told her sad story. What can I say? The young man waved his hands. We all walk under God, and no one knows what will happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow in a week. There is no need to despair. And your husband? Well then, that's not the man you were going to get along with. Maybe, Adriana nodded. But to be honest, it doesn't make me feel any better. Time heals, William shrugged and winked. You know what you need right now. And what's to get drunk? I'm sorry, get drunk what? Repeated the new acquaintance. Actually, I don't drink. So I laughed too, he laughed. But there's a first time for everything, isn't there? So let's go to the bar. A toast to getting to know each other. Let's go. She made up her mind. That day, Adriana drank herself into oblivion for the first time. And the next morning, she woke up in her own apartment, realizing that someone was lying next to her. The young woman cried out. It was William. What are we doing up? Fun, he asked, opening his eyes. I'm that. And you and I are what? William gave a funny shout, And a second later, Adriana laughed infectiously. But actually, last night at the bar, we got into a you versus me thing. Yeah, not really, she mumbled embarrassedly. But we did. The young woman was silent, and William said seriously, Adriana, we are adults. What happened is what happened. But if you're so uncomfortable, I can leave, and you'll never see me again. Adriana was silent. She suddenly realized that I didn't want to. I must admit that William turned out to be an attentive and interesting conversationalist. And most importantly, it was much easier in his company. According to William, he was a freelancer, but when asked what he does, William answered a little bit of everything. Sometimes I work with advertising agencies, repair cars, phones, and stuff like that. I see, nodded Adriana. A few months later, William proposed to Adriana. They signed without witnesses and other wedding tinsel. And then they moved on to married life. This time, the absence of children did not bother Adriana too much. Either she had gotten over her desire to be a mother, or she had the impression that William did not pay any attention to it. But the fact remained. Sometimes Adriana wondered how much William would be enough. She waited for her husband to talk about children, but it never happened. What happened was much worse. One day, Adriana came home from work and found the young woman in her kitchen. And you pardon me, who was taken aback, Adriana? And I smiled, stranger. Camille. I mean, it's a pleasure. My name is Adriana. You must be related to William. Yeah, I guess I am. Camille nodded. I didn't see you at the wedding. Adriana said, I wasn't there, but I'm going to live here now. Didn't William say he was planning to file for divorce? Are you kidding? Adriana exclaimed. Camille shrugged her shoulders. You get a divorce, and I'll live here with William. What do you mean here? This is my apartment. But my Lochka was yours, and now she's ours, grinned the intruders. Do you want to see the papers? Adriana already sensed something wrong, but she said please. And when Adriana saw the document, according to which the apartment now belongs to William, her eyes went black. It was nothing more than a deed of gift. Based on its contents, it appeared that Adriana had given her apartment as a gift. You see, Camille said triumphantly, William's apartment, and you have almost no rights to it. I say almost, because it's a matter of time. Are you all lying? Shouted Adriana. This document is a fake. I'm going to call Yura now. Yes, please, sniggered the rival. And hearing the rattle of the key in the keyhole, added, and here, by the way, he is, so no need to call anyone. But I see you've already met him, said William with a wicked smile. And Adriana realized with horror that everything this Camille had said was true. William, what does that mean? She demanded an explanation. It means, my dear, that you are nobody in this apartment, and your name is nothing. I'm filing for divorce, and Camille will live here now. Well, I think she's already filled you in on that. But for what? Adriana whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. Why not? William shrugged. You want to live. You've got to get your head around it. And if you don't want to be evicted from here with the police, you'd better pack your things and vacate the premises. And I'm still your wife. Squeezing it out like that, nodded the husband. But it's a matter of 1 month. Will it make any difference? I guess not. This is my woman, and you're not here. And smirked, added, or do you want to be the third? I didn't know you were such a drag. What kind of scumbag are you? Adriana shook her head. But that's just the way it is. The young woman realized she had nothing more to do here. She went to pack her things, but then William remarked approvingly, I always knew you were a smart girl. Adriana packed her suitcase and left the apartment. But where to go? Her parents were so happy that after the divorce, which had not been easy for their daughter, she had managed to organize her personal life and finally become a victim of a con artist. And where to go? Adriana thought feverishly. The young woman sat on a bench and caught the pitying glances of people passing by. She looked very unhappy indeed. The young woman wanted to forget from her longing. Adriana went to Kathy, who lived nearby. "Did you go to the police?" asked her friend. "No," she shook her head. "I hadn't thought about it." "And you should have. The document seems to be authentic," Adriana said in despair. "That's not a fact. In any case, it should be checked. Here's the thing. You, of course, cried. But go to the police tomorrow morning." "I'll do that." A visit to the police turned up nothing. What can I say? The officer, whose name was Noah, "You've just been scammed out of your apartment." "I figured that out without you," Adriana said sadly. "But what to do? The document can be checked for authenticity." "Of course it's important," said the policeman. "But for that, we need a warrant. What's the problem?" The young woman started to get agitated. "And you do not yell at me, or you get involved with the wrong people. And then you tell us how to do our jobs." "I'm sorry." Adriana decided it was better not to make the policeman angry, or God forbid, he'd refuse to take the case. "What's the big deal?" He waved his hand. "So that's that. Now I'll give you some pictures of marriage and apartment swindlers. What if your husband is among them?" The policeman laid out some photos in front of the young woman. "Is that him?" Adriana exclaimed. "That's William." "Are you sure?" "Well, you know, I lived with this man for a year. The thing is, this man is known to us," as Charles told the policeman. "You're not the first person he's dumped on an apartment, are you?" "And what's with the dropped voice?" asked Adriana. "What are my chances of getting my apartment back?" "We'll try to do our best," Noah replied evasively. She just sighed. It sounded, to put it bluntly, not very encouraging. But there was nothing to do. "Come up tomorrow at 10:00, and we hope for an apartment," added Vason. "Well," nodded Adriana, and walked out of the office. She was scared to even think that she could be left on the street. Adriana's parents were living in one. She didn't want to embarrass them, or even upset them. "So what did the police tell you?" Kathy asked when Adriana got back. "Nothing concrete yet." She sighed and told them about the visit. "Yes, friend. I don't envy you," Kathy said sympathetically. "But let's hope for the best." Let's hope for the best. But the hopes for the future were not realized. The document turned out to be the most authentic, and the policemen could only throw up their hands. "But is there nothing that can be done?" Adriana asked. "Is there no way to prove that I lived here? After all, this apartment was given to me as a result of the exchange after the divorce." "An exchange?" "Divorce," grinned Vason. "Not a boring life, citizen. And for the future, I recommend to be more careful in choosing a life partner. And do not get involved with anyone. Everything will be like people." Adriana realized that the police just don't want to spoil the statistics with another case. But maybe there were other ways to get the apartment back. Kathy pondered. "There must be evidence that you and your ex-spouse are exchanging the apartment. Would you just give up?" "Who told you that?" But it didn't turn out to be that simple. Apparently, William Charles was a master con artist. There's a reason this Vason guy said Adriana wasn't his first victim. There was no record of the apartment being exchanged. The deed of gift in William's name was authentic. What was there to do? Only go to her parents and tell them everything. After all, Kathy had a boyfriend, Benjamin, who was looking at the beautiful young lodger with marked interest. "Adriana, I understand and sympathize with you, but you have to understand," Kathy said. "Yes, I understand," Adriana replied and went to pack her things. But trouble does not come alone. A few days after the young woman moved in with her parents at Sebastian's, her father began severe heart pain, a massive heart attack. The doctor said he could not be saved. And after 40, Sebastian's mom Cindy quietly passed away in her sleep. "It's my fault," Adriana lamented. "It was because of my problems that Daddy and Mommy were gone." And again the apartment issue. The one-room apartment where Adriana's parents lived had turned out to be disputed, and she had been asked to leave it. But how come? She asked an employee of the city administration. "You see, I have nowhere else to go, and you think it's my problem." arrogantly said a burly middle-aged woman. Then Adriana realized it was a dead end. It couldn't get any worse. The young woman left the apartment and went wherever she was looking. And they were looking nowhere. Adriana had some money left, enough to rent a small house in the private sector, but she decided not to spend it. So the young woman moved into a social hotel for people in difficult life situations. But however she got there, she became a real homeless person. No residence registration, no place of her own. On top of that, Adriana was fired from school. Nothing personal. The principal said, "But I don't want any problem employees." Nice one. The psychologist lives in a social hotel. David, but I need something to live on. The girl said in despair, "I'll find something." "Fine," he nodded. "When you think of something, then come back. I'm sure you won't have any trouble getting a job." Adriana, I'll be perfectly frank. Personally, I like you very much. But there's such a thing as the image of an institution. It's gotten to the point where students are whispering about you. So I'm sure the hotel will take good care of you. You won't starve to death. "I heard you," Adriana replied. "I won't spoil the image of the school. Have a good day." Having said that, the young woman left. And when she left the principal's office, she really felt the mocking looks of her colleagues and students. God, until when will fate test my strength? Adriana thought sadly. She went back to the hotel and sat down on the flimsy sofa, covering her face with her hands. Adriana thought back to everything. The former husband of the con man William Charles, the check-in at the social hotel, and finally the dismissal. "Did something happen to you?" Kelly asked, a friend in distress. Kelly was a victim of black realtors. Just like Adriana, she trusted a charming man, and that man threw the young woman out on the street in the winter cold. And if it wasn't for the hotel staff passing by on a raid, Kelly wouldn't be alive anymore. "What happened?" Adriana asked personally again. "Nothing. Except I don't have a place to live, and now I've lost my job." "What's a job got to do with it?" "Because I'm ruining the school's image with my unenviable status." Adriana grinned wryly and told Kelly about her conversation with the principal. "Those bastards," she exclaimed. "No," Adriana sighed. "It's much simpler than that. It's every man for himself. And there's nothing you can do about it." "That's true," Kelly nodded. And noticing a strand of hair on Adriana's shoulder, she said, "Is your hair coming out? Must be nervous." In the morning, they woke up to screaming, fire, burning. That's all they needed. The smell of burning was getting stronger and stronger, and people were running for the exits. "Don't panic, don't panic," the hotel director exhorted the guests. The inn burned to the ground. Now Adriana and the other residents had only one way out. As long as Adriana had money, she lived in a hostel, but that ran out, and the young woman was forced onto the streets. No money, no place to live. The receptionist said, "Well, maybe I can do some work. I'm not afraid of any work." "We don't practice such things," answered the employee and defiantly began to write something in a notebook, from time to time looking at the screen, standing in front of her laptop. "Well, thank you," Adriana answered with a sigh and headed for the exit. "Wait," the receptionist called out to her. "You say you're not afraid of any job. There's a hospice a block away. Maybe they'll take you there to take care of the sick, for bed and board. See if you can apply there." "Thank you." The young woman nodded and left the table. "I understand and sympathize with you, but the staff is full," said the head of the hospice. "But you have to understand. A psychology degree is good, of course, but we already have a psychologist. We can't help everyone who needs help. After all, this isn't a labor exchange. But maybe I could be a backup." Lyra insisted. There was no choice. "I won't take up much space, and I'm not shy." There was a knock on the door, and the manager said, "Excuse me, we don't need to work." A young and elegantly dressed man entered the office. "Hello, Mason." The superintendent smiled cordially. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Benjamin. With dignity replied Vezet. I need to talk to you. Are you still here? The superintendent frowned, looking at the liar. I think I made myself clear. I'm sorry, the young woman said quietly and left the office. Adriana took the hallway, wondering if there was another social hotel in town. There was no money on the phone, so she couldn't monitor the city for it. Adriana was already approaching the exit when suddenly she was called by Wait. The young woman turned around and saw the same young man with whom she met in the office of the head of the hospice. Are you for me? She asked. Yes, you are. The stranger nodded with a smile. Benjamin said you had a problem. And who doesn't? Bitterly, Adriana grinned. I think I can help you, the man said. My name is Mason. You've heard, though. Well, I'd like to offer you a live-in job. You want to offer me a job? The young woman asked in disbelief. But yes, in general. But I can't pay much. It's a business problem. But food and a roof over my head are all guaranteed. Frankly, it was all too good to be true, and to say I've been burned twice is no joke. Maybe this is the one they're talking about. God loves a trinity. But on the other hand, there were no other options, unless she went to the street, where she actually was now. What's your name? Mason asked. My name is Adriana, answered the young woman. Adriana smiled like a singer. Well, you could say that. Adriana smiled shyly. You know what? Adriana winked. Mason, you're much prettier, really. The young woman was embarrassed. She had already forgotten that men happened to compliment women. For her, it was somewhere else in her life. So how about my proposal? Asked Mason. But you didn't tell me what I should do. Adriana pointed out reasonably. Oh yes, I'm sorry. And the thing you were trying to get hospice care for. My mother needs a caregiver. But first I would ask you to tell me what happened to you. The young woman was uncomfortable telling the story of being the victim of a con artist. So Adriana confined herself to the story of divorce, the loss of her parents, and the recognition of their housing as disputed. Well, I think I can help you, Longman said. After listening to her story, unlike most divorced women of the Soviet era, Betty Longman was not the least bit complex about it. She would never live with a man on the principle that he was not good, but mine. She was more familiar with the principle that it was better to starve than to eat anything. After studying for a year and a half with an alcoholic with criminal tendencies, Betty showed Ivan the door, and then she did not hesitate to file for divorce. She later learned that her ex-brother-in-law had gone to jail for burglary. I just shrugged my shoulders, and I shouldn't have raised my son. And the rest of it was such a load of crap. Betty worked as a dispatcher at the trolley park. The pay wasn't bad, but you can't have too much money, especially if you're a divorced woman with a child. And the young woman took a second job as a hospital nurse. The young mother was exhausted, but she knew that the little mommy would not need anything. Betty cared not that the child was fed, clothed, shoe, but also about his leisure time. From the first grade, Mason went to 2 sports sections on swimming and basketball. Later, the boy became interested in chess, and of course, his mother did not neglect his computer literacy. The boy grew up erudite and well-rounded, and Betty was happy about it. Besides, she was proud of the fact that Mason Longman was a good-looking guy and enjoyed success among the girls. Betty didn't skimp on her son's entertainment either. Mom, but this is the most expensive nightclub, shook his head when Betty presented him with flyers for his 16th birthday, a concert by a popular band. So, is it fun? Asked his mother. We live once, and you had fun. It's kind of shameful, replied the guy. You work, live and work hard, and I have fun. Well, when to do it, if not when you're young? Betty objected. Some of the relatives and friends of the family had told Ethan that, look, don't let it get you down. But it didn't. When it came time to think about education, Mason said that he decided to enter the Faculty of Economics. In the future, I want to devote my life to business. He explained his choice. The competition is crazy, Betty remarked. Mother, do you really doubt me? No, the woman shrugged. But as far as I know, to get into the economics department, you need goodwill and a lot of money. Mom, I've already thought about it, Mason said. I'm gonna work part-time. And where are you going to work part-time? Betty chuckled. Where will they take you? I've already been hired, he smiled. At a restaurant as a waiter. Oh, come on. That's the truth. And if I have time, I'll work as a promoter or a courier. I could use a part-time job right now. Well, part-time work only strongly not overwork with a sigh, said the mother, automatically taking hold of the heart. The mother, frightened, asked Mason, Are you feeling okay? Yes, I'm fine. Right. Mason got a job as a waiter. It paid well, plus tips. The day ended when the last customer left, which sometimes went past 0 o'clock. After such shifts, Mason needed a truly Herculean effort not to fall asleep for lessons. On Saturdays and Sundays, he worked part-time as a promoter or handed out publications of an advertising nature. It was hard as hell, but the thought of studying economics and then becoming a businessman warmed his soul. Some people said that you don't have to study for 5 years to be a businessman. Listen to a course on the basics of entrepreneurship and all that, said Liam's school friend Mason. No, I want to study everything thoroughly, not grab the top. Shook his head at me. Liam, grandiose plans. 5 years of being a student flew by much faster than it seemed to Mason at first. The boy faithfully attended all lectures, took an active part in seminars and colloquiums, but he couldn't wait to get a diploma and make the first steps in business. Sometimes Mason thought that Liam was probably right, and such difficulties were really unnecessary. He knew a lot of double majors who started earning good money almost after school. However, being a perfectionist, the guy wanted everything to be, as he put it, by his wits. And here he is, a young economist, full of the most daring plans, proudly shows his mother a red diploma. What am I going to say? Betty smiled. Well done, and you deserve encouragement. What do you want? I'm a mom. I just want to get rich and take you to a fancy restaurant. No more, no less. Humorist. The parent laughed. I'm more serious than ever. This will be the best encouragement. There was no money to start my own business. Therefore, the first pressing issue was employment. For a whole month, Mason went around to organizations, but in vain. We need a candidate with experience in the field, he answered in 10 companies. The remaining 2 promised to call him. Eventually, Mason managed to get a job at a Yum grocery company, and his business took off. As soon as management had the opportunity to pay employees more, they didn't fail to do so. After a year, Mason decided to go freelance. I'm sorry to part with you, Kevin said as he signed the application. It was a pleasure working with you, too, Mason replied sincerely. But I've been dreaming of my own business since high school. Well, may it work out for you, nodded the now ex-boss. What are you going to do, if it's no secret? No, it's no secret. I'm gonna open a real estate agency. Oh, really? Kevin said respectfully. I think so too, smiled Mason. And if you need to buy, sell, or exchange real estate, I'd be happy to help. I will, laughed the manager. And good luck. Thank you. And you too, Longman replied, after which the men exchanged a firm handshake. Amcor Real Estate Agency started to turn a profit after a couple of months. Of course, it was a long way from fabulous wealth. But Mason had every reason to be proud of himself. He'd made it. And what was to come? On the day of his mother's 45th birthday, Mason handed her a luxurious bouquet of dark pink roses and said, Mom, now we'll buy you the most gorgeous evening dress we can find. And tonight we're going to a nice restaurant. How about that? Oh, Mason, but that would be expensive, Betty said. Why don't we cook something at home? We'll have guests over and remember what you once said to me in response to a similar phrase. With a laugh he asked that we only live once. So we go to a restaurant and don't argue with me. Thank goodness I can afford it now. They went to an expensive boutique and bought for Betty a stunning dress, sparkling with trips of cobalt blue and beautifully, revealing her slender figure. And in the evening, mother and son went to a cozy country restaurant and sat gloriously, promised to take you out to a restaurant at least twice a year on your birthday. And on March 8th solemnly said the son, "Do you want to spoil me?" With a laugh asked Betty, touched by her son's words. "That's exactly what Mason confirmed. You used to spoil me. Now it's my turn." The agency still fed Mason and his staff heartily, but it wasn't enough for him. So Longman started thinking about opening a new branch, and he succeeded. "Mason," Betty said at dinner one night, "I was talking to Aunt Bailey today, and she asked if you could find some work for her, Michael." At the mention of his cousin, Mason snorted incredulously. How long had he remembered Michael? He'd always wanted easy money. After high school, Mason's cousin had enrolled in a technical school to study software engineering. Michael reasoned that programmers made good money. What is his truth? Except that Michael forgot about one thing. In order to earn this very good money, you must first learn and start working. As a result, Michael was expelled after the first session, and then the failed programmer tried to earn money. However, the ways of earning money did not inspire confidence and looked more like fraud. "What are you doing all this fooling around?" Mason once said. "Try to get back into tech, or go somewhere else. But there's no easy money in it." But Michael wasn't interested in any reasonable arguments. He wanted it all. "Fortune is fickle," shrugged his cousin. "One day there is none, and the next day there will be." "Why wouldn't they?" Mason asked reasonably. "One should be able to wait admonitively," Michael replied. And then word got out that he'd started gambling. The guy had money, and Michael said to Mason, "Well, I told you, Vital. Even an amateur like me knows that you get a beginner hooked on winning first, and once they get the hang of it, they start losing." Mason grinned mirthfully. "Why not?" Michael objected. "If you think with your head, everything will be fine." And soon Mason's prediction came true. Michael owed a large sum to some criminal authority, and the guy was in serious trouble. Aunt Valia, Betty's sister, came to her nephew and banged at his feet. "Spells help a brother. I won't survive if anything happens to him." Mason helped. What's there to do? What's the ritual? He generously lent the money, noting that it was time to start earning his own money. And now, a year after this story, Michael seems ripe or desperate to find a magical way to make serious money. "Can you think of anything?" Betty asked. "Probably," Mason replied after a little thought. "But I can't guarantee fabulous money. He's got no education, no skills. And have him come back tomorrow morning." To be honest, he didn't really believe Michael would come. But he did, and he miraculously agreed to take the office manager's job. Mason had no idea what it would cost him to help him get his cousin hired. To Mason's surprise, Michael faithfully performed the duties of office manager. Growing up, Longman noted. And a few months later, Mason went to his personal account to pay the tax and whizzed out of the company's accounts more than half of the amount to pay the tax, of course enough. But what to do next? It was supposed that all available assets would be used for the development of the branch and some needs of the head office. And there was no money. Mason refused to believe it. But the truth was obvious. The missing money was clearly Michael's doing. Had he really started gambling again? Depressed, Longman thought and dialed the receptionist's number. "Katya, would you be so kind as to get Michael for me?" "Okay," Mason shouted the receptionist. Michael came up about 10 minutes later. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Charles, is there something you want to tell me?" It was obvious from his cousin's face that he wanted to lie that he didn't understand anything. So Mason decided to take the bull by the horns. Don't let him think that being related gives Michael the right to do whatever he wants. He wants to work for his health. No, so he's Mason. He's not holding anyone back. "Michael, are you playing with metal in your voice again?" he asked. "I'm not." "But you're the one who took most of the money out of the accounts," Mason interrupted. "Did you owe someone again?" Michael fell silent, slurring. "Is that what you needed this job for?" Longman stated, "You know, I can forgive anything but stealing from my own. That's called fatherland. After all, if you had a problem, you could have told me about it instead of hacking into the computer to steal company money. So now you're going to fire me." Mason nodded. "I'm sorry, brother, but I can't trust you." A few days later, a police officer visited the office. Longman Mason asked the employee upon entering his office. "Yes, that's me," politely replied the office owner. "What can I do for you?" "We've received a report that a company is running an apartment scam," said the police officer. "What is this nonsense?" Mason exclaimed, "My company has an impeccable reputation. We've been through a lot of transactions. Yes, you should read the reviews about our firm on the internet. There's never been a scam." "We'll take care of it," said the law enforcement officer. "You'll have to come with us." "But I cannot," Mason said in desperation. "I have a meeting with a client in 20 minutes. "I don't think so." The policeman grinned. "The company's office will be sealed until the circumstances are clarified." The next 2 weeks were a living hell. Mason was shown several documents according to which people were transferring housing to other people. The papers were authentic and drawn up in the office of the real estate agency Comcor. Mason couldn't help but realize that apartment scams, like theft, were the work of a cousin. "I should have known what he needed the job for," he berated himself. But what's the use? The important thing now was not to go to jail. Betty's health left a lot to be desired. And who but Mason would take care of her? Longman's lawyer had done a good job. He managed to get a logical forensics count, and Mason's signature was found to be forged. He was eventually released on his own recognizance. As for Michael, he lay low, and therefore it was not possible to attract him. And where's the obvious evidence of his guilt? Anyway, Mason's firm lost its sterling reputation. Clients became noticeably less, and one day Mason was forced to declare bankruptcy. It could have been worse. Mr. Longman is alive, well and free. The rest will follow. Except Mom. No matter how hard Mason tried to hide his problems from Betty, she found out. All things secret, as you know, come to light. And the earth is full of rumors. But how could it be? Her mother said in a stricken voice, "He's your brother." "Unfortunately, Mom," Mason replied with a bitter smile. "For some people, nothing is sacred. I can't get my head around it. Just a poor woman." Betty took what happened to her son too personally and became ill. She had trouble walking, talking, and caring for herself. That's why it didn't require a caregiver. Mason still had some money to spare and hired a caregiver from an agency. 3 months, he figured. And then, God willing, I'd find a decent job. Mason, as a young man who used to work as a courier promoter, he did not mind unloading railcars offered in the store as a loader. As for more monetary and stable work, her search has not yielded any results. The story of the scandal in Odessa real estate office flew all over the city, and no one wanted to deal with Mason. He was very much on the wrong side of the throat. Young but promising businessman. Maybe some of his old contacts knew Mason was innocent. But such acquaintances either did not want to compromise themselves in the eyes of other representatives of the business community, or did not want Longman once a strong competitor to rise from its knees. Victoria, whom Mason was dating at the time, stopped returning his calls, and because she said she loved money. "She did," said Betty, who had always disliked Vika. "She loves money," said Betty, who always disliked Vika. Money was running low and bursting. Rich realized that next month he would have nothing to pay the caregivers with. Betty, meanwhile, was quietly fading away, and the doctors only spread their hands. The result of severe stress, in one voice, said, plus not very healthy heart. The main thing is to regularly take the prescribed drugs of calmness and observe bed rest, but also appropriate care. Here, the appropriate care came into question. After all, it required an investment, and they needed something to eat as well. Mason feverishly considered his options and finally came up with one. He decided to contact the hospice, which supervised, Perhaps Benjamin will match him with a specialist who will agree to work for a moderate fee, food and a roof over his head. He was helping us, wasn't he? But Benjamin seemed to think otherwise. Oh, really? The hospice director exclaimed. I hire highly qualified people. My staff won't work for less than that. Benjamin tore off the sticker and wrote the amount for which he said his subordinates were willing to work. Mason couldn't afford it, but we can't say his trip to the hospice was in vain. You know what? Exclaimed the master of the office. Did you see from me? Now the lady was coming out of her pocket and remembered the young woman whom Benjamin had apparently turned away. And I nodded. She offered me her services for food and a corner, said the superintendent. I don't have any vacancies. The woman is in a difficult situation. And anyway, if you are interested, you can catch up with her and offer her a job. Thank you, Mason replied, and quickly walked out of the office, thinking that with mercy of the staff of hospices and other similar places is tight. However, if you think hard enough, you can hardly blame them for that. Police officers, ritualists, surgeons, and many others touch human grief almost every day. It's their job. And if you sympathize with everyone, it won't last long. But Longman has helped so much with this hospice that the superintendents could have come up with some variant for him. Although, in fact, he only came up with one if it was worthwhile. Mason was lucky. The young woman Benjamin was talking about hadn't left yet, and when Longman called out to her and the stranger turned around, he realized that this girl needed help. Her eyes were so beautiful, but so sad, it made the former owner of the real estate office's heart ache. But first, the business part of the conversation. The negotiations had taken place. Mason and her mother lived in a small but very nice cottage. Adriana entered the house and immediately felt like pinching herself. Am I really going to live in this house? The young woman thought, not believing her happiness. Let me show you to your room first, Mason suggested. And then I'll introduce you to your mom. Okay, Mason nodded to Adriana. It's just Mason, he smiled. I'm not that old. Adriana just shrugged. The room she'd be staying in was sunny and bright, cozy and spacious, especially after the social hotel in Hosta. Adriana thought with a sigh. Just what will happen next? Will it be my destiny to wander around in other people's houses from now on? Do you like it? Asked the owner of the cottage. Yes, Adriana nodded, wondering if he was joking. It was clear that a man who had asked for hospice care would be happy in any conditions. A room on the second floor of the cottage was something she couldn't even dream of. Well, that's fine, Mason smiled. Perhaps you'd like a bath. I wouldn't say no, the young woman muttered embarrassedly. The baths are down the hall, said the employer unexpectedly, and added in a changing tone after the engagement, I can offer only a man's robe. Thank you. Adriana nodded with a shy smile. When was the last time I had such a luxurious bath? I thought. The young woman inhaled the scent of strawberries with pleasure. A long time ago in another life. Just like this, in another life. And what will this life be like? Let's hope that this time I'll do well. God willing, everything will work out. The water is already cold. But Adriana didn't seem to notice. She was having such a good time. But remembering why she was here, Adriana reluctantly finished her water treatment and, putting on her robe, left the bathroom. She hesitantly stopped in the middle of the hall, not knowing where to go next to her room. But Adriana would have to meet her ward. Yes, but she needed to change her clothes. So the dress Adriana was wearing was filthy, and frankly, smelled of sweat as she stood helplessly wondering where to move. Mason's lightly steamed footsteps were heard on the stairs. He said with a smile, "Thank you," Adriana replied. "Now we will eat and get to know the ward," Mason said cheerfully and explained we will eat in her room. But let's go. Mason's mother turned out to be a thin and probably once very attractive woman. She had a kind, warm, and sincere smile. Looking at Adriana's mother, I wanted to believe that she would not be deceived in this house. What could I take from her? Adriana grinned to herself. Well, "Welcome," said the woman in an affectionate and melodious voice weakened by illness. "My name is Betty Adriana." She smiled. Mother Mason was just over 50. If it weren't for the fine lines around her eyes and the corners of her lips, she might have been 40, if not less. Her long golden blonde hair, touched with gray. The woman had spent an hour pulling her hair back and putting it up high. But unlike many of Betty's peers, her hairstyle was not outdated in the slightest. "That's what Adriana," the ward said quietly. "May I call you that?" Adriana nodded. Betty said, "So Adriana, in this house, are you a guest?" Yes, and don't look at me." "So Mason told me that you were in a difficult situation, and it would be sacrilege to invite you here as a servant." Adriana looked at Mason confused, and he nodded. Yes, that's right. You'll be more of a companion to Mama than a caregiver." "Adriana, what about your sense of humor?" "Your sense of humor?" "I don't know what to say," the young woman said thoughtfully. 4 years ago, I would have said that I have a great sense of humor. I'm a psychologist by training." But now, the psychologist was a little surprised at Mason. "Yes," she sighed. "And worked in your specialty." "Worked," nodded Adriana. "In another life, you're right." Longman suddenly smiled, winked at her. It was indeed in another life. "And do you know why?" "Because there's a new life waiting for you now. And it's going to be better than the old one." "You don't believe me." And Adriana believed him for some reason. "Adriana, you know what I've been thinking?" Asked Mason at breakfast. Betty was still asleep, and they had breakfast in the kitchen. Adriana raised her head and looked at him questioningly. "You will be my mother's personal psychologist," Mason said. "Does she need a psychologist?" Adriana asked. "We all need a psychologist from time to time," Longman said thoughtfully, clearly thinking about something else. Mason was going to deliver the next batch of advertising papers and was dressed very democratically. A t-shirt and a tracksuit. Adriana remembered Longman talking about business problems, but didn't dare to ask what he was doing. Mason had been forced to sell this car because of debts and now walked to the office, thinking that the bus courier's job came in handy. In addition, the bicycle provided by the advertising agency is also not bad, and for health and fun, thought Mason. He always knew how to find a plus in everything. "Hello, Julia," greeted Mason, the employee of the advertising agency. "Are you as charming as always?" "Thank you." Mason smiled at the girl. It's nice to hear a compliment early in the morning, and even from such an interesting man. "It's not a compliment, but the truth." Longman smiled. Julia was indeed a marvel. How good? A petite brunette of about 23, with sly brown eyes and long lashes. "Still nice. Not without coquetry," replied the employee and proceeded to work matters. "Here are your newspapers. Have a good working day." "Thank you." Mason put a pile of advertising newspapers on the trunk and rolled towards the front of the work entrusted to him. On the way to the station, the former businessman thought about the nurse he'd brought into the house to care for his mother, more precisely, about the personal psychologist. And to be perfectly honest, Mason did not see Adriana as an employee. Adriana was undoubtedly very beautiful. Mason, of course, had no way of knowing what the young woman had looked like before she'd found herself in her predicament. But she seemed to be in Adriana's favor. She had her passport with her, and Longman knew that Lilia was 27, a year younger than himself. No, Adriana didn't look older than her age, although in her position that would make sense. It was just that those stunning green eyes seemed to belong to a woman in her 40s, if not older. The eyes of a wise and damaged woman. That was the definition that came to Mason's mind. Generally, the former owner of real estate agencies would prefer a caregiver in the age of years, so it is from 45. But in his situation, he didn't have to choose. As long as she was clean and responsible, Mason decided, and rushed to catch up with the girl. Adriana made quite a positive impression on Longman, and her psychology degree was a plus. Suddenly, Mason realized he wanted to do something nice for Adriana. Only this. As he thought about it, he almost missed the right street and mentally chuckled. Hadn't you fallen in love with Longman and remembered that airplanes came first? And the girls, then Mason went about his cursory duties. Betty, what can I make you for breakfast? Adriana asked with a smile. Don't fuss, the girl said affectionately to her mentee, and then realized, oh, it's okay that I'm on a first-name basis. It's okay. So what can I make? Coffee and a couple of cheese sandwiches would be quite enough. With a slight wave of her hand, Betty replied, and let's go to my place for a chat. Adriana replied well, and went into the kitchen. Adriana, I hope we haven't offended you in any way, the landlady asked with genuine concern. Not at all, no, Adriana exclaimed. You just saved me. You gave me a roof over my head. No work, Betty objected. Are you our guest? Why should I be? It's not like I'm related to you. No relation, the woman nodded. But sometimes relatives are worse than strangers. There was a story in our family that got Mason into business trouble. But Mason will tell you about that, if he wants to, of course. Well, Adriana, unfortunately, kinship doesn't matter. Let's not be sad. Adriana, yes, I realize, of course, that the Mason robe suits you, but maybe we can find you something from my closet. Oh, this is so uncomfortable. What else? Betty, it's much more comfortable than walking around the house in a man's robe. And the woman laughed merrily. Adriana jumped in, and within a minute they were laughing until they cried. So let's get to the makeover, Betty winked, getting out of bed. Oh, I'm getting a little dizzy. So maybe later, Adriana asked fearfully. No, it's okay, the employer's mother reassured her. I'll just sit for a few minutes and the check and everything will be fine. In the end, Adriana became the owner of a pretty soft blue polka dot dress, sewn from you goat-like cotton blouse with a floral brand in bed colors, a pair of summer skirts, and a long robe of fine silk. Well, that's quite a change, Betty said approvingly as the young woman put on the blouse and skirt. You're a fashionista, aren't you? Adriana said with a smile. Of course, Mason often spoiled me with beautiful clothes, she answered in a satisfied voice, and with a sigh, she added when he had the chance. Well, God willing, things will work out for him, Betty said the young woman. You don't think? I can do a lot of things and I'm willing to do all the cooking in the house, clean the windows, wash. Adriana jokingly wagged his finger at Betty. I said you're our guest first. We'll figure out the rest as we go along. When Mason finished delivering the ads, he went to the office, and then it hit him. Why didn't I think of that before? He chastised himself as he drove up to the store that sold clothes. Adriana had nothing to wear. He remembered, unassuming. Most likely issued in a social hotel dress, Adriana, and sighed heavily. What a pleasure it would have been for him to put her in his Puget right now and drive her to the boutique. But, alas, the blessed times when Mason could afford it were behind him. And this one you drop, sternly, he ordered himself. What are your years? You're not even a day old. And you'll still have that kind of decadence. In the meantime, girls, my dear, how much does a dress like this cost? Longman asked the two young saleswomen, taking off his sunglasses. No matter how much Mason convinced himself that there's no such thing as a bad job, and the most important thing is that there is. The former entrepreneur was desperately afraid someone would recognize him. No, Longman wasn't a snob. After all, he wasn't a rich hare himself. Still, his pride prevented him from showing himself to his acquaintances, especially those in the business community, as a courier and other low-level characters. However, this store was on the outskirts of town, and the risk of being there was minimal. Mason was willing to bet that it was zero. One of the girls mentioned the price of a pretty white dress, and Mason calculated whether his present earnings would be enough for a couple of such dresses, and when he realized that it would be enough, and that there would be some left over, he said cheerfully, well, fine, let's do it this way. I'll come and get the money in half an hour. In the meantime, you calm this down. And this one. Are you sure you're coming? Asked the second saleswoman. Mason smiled. Nice guy, she said. Yes, his girlfriend is lucky, replied her partner. Not rich, but he's like a stone wall behind him. You know, I think he's got all the riches ahead of him. Today our store, and there. And then, look, and to an expensive boutique is not far away. Mason was pleasantly surprised to see his mother and Adriana chatting and smiling at each other in the gazebo. For the last month, Betty had not gone outside, only stared out the window. Summer was just coming into its own, and it was still a little chilly in the morning, so her mother threw a poncho over her shoulders. Many of the women were carefully covered with light plaid. Betty's cheeks flushed. She hung back, looking better, and Mason thought of her and Adriana's meeting at the hospice. Nothing short of a gift of fate. I'm back, cheerfully, he announced. And then Longman's gaze fell on Adriana. She was wearing the skirt and blouse he had bought from his mother in Thailand. She's much prettier than I thought. Mason thought in amazement. Suddenly, he felt like a classicist giving a chocolate bar to a girl he liked for the first time. How was your day? Fun, he asked. Just great, Betty exclaimed. And we got a little dressed up. Well done, Mason nodded with a smile. Adriana thought, looking at them, that such a mother-son relationship was rare. She remembered her first husband. James had undoubtedly loved his mother, but there was still no such reverent regard for her. The mother of her second husband, Adriana, did not know. William, that is, Charles, or whoever it was, said she was dead. But was that really the case? Adriana waved her head, shaking it away from her thoughts of who was responsible for all her troubles. What's wrong? Mason asked. No, everything's fine, the young woman assured him. Adriana, and I have a small gift for you, smiled Longman, taking out of the bag. Oh, really? You shouldn't have. Adriana was embarrassed, realizing that it was probably clothes. It was very much worth it. He said firmly, You have to wear something, don't you? But I'm here to take care of your mother. Why on earth would you give me gifts? She doesn't trust men. Betty sadly realized and decided to take matters into her own hands. Adriana, I understand that you are uncomfortable accepting gifts from a man you know, she said, but you can accept these things against a future paycheck. But of course, Mason exclaimed gratefully, looking at his mother. Well, if so, nodded Adriana. That's settled, summarized Betty. Now let's go to lunch, Mason. Adriana, and I made these patties. They're delicious. She's a magician. I want some, smiled my son. Let's go. What's the point? A week passed. The atmosphere in the Mason house was improving day by day, and it couldn't be happier. This girl was a ray of light for us, Mason thought one day. And that word fit Adriana like no other. Betty was alive and seemed to be on the mend. The house was always filled with good food and exemplary cleanliness. Sometimes Mason felt like Adriana was a member of the family. He thought about her a lot in general, until he finally realized he was in love. Adriana, I think I like you, said Betty once. What makes you say that? Adriana, these things don't happen for some reason, said the mentee, who had become a real friend to Adriana over the days. I am Mason's mom, and I can feel his every mood. You can't fool a mother's heart. When you have children of your own, you'll realize that. Adriana sighed heavily at the mention of children. After all, that was essentially where it had all started, or had it. After all, James had turned out to be a philanderer, so whether they had a child or not wouldn't change anything. Sooner or later, his nature would come out. One way or another, it happened the way it did. Adriana, and she woke up thinking, I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, Betty said thoughtfully. It's all right, isn't it? The woman asked incredulously. Adriana nodded, smiled, and squeezed Betty's hand, whispering, Really? The girl's lyrics were broken by the cheerful voice of Mason. Why don't we have a picnic, Chuck? The weather is marvelous. The soul is in need of a party. And there's an occasion. What's the occasion? Mother inquired. I got a bonus today, he boasted. So it's a good idea. Isn't that a great idea? Betty said approvingly. Adriana, what do you think? I like it too, the young woman smiled. But then I'm off to the store for wine and meat. Adriana, how do you feel about wine? They'd already switched to you, and each was pleased to note that it was more comfortable that way. Wine? I don't know, honestly. I'm not a wine drinker. But I wouldn't say no to a good glass of wine. No one offers you a bad one. Longman laughed. Mason returned half an hour later with 2 rather weighty bags of food, besides 2 bottles of red wine, and he had already bought huge pink tomatoes, cucumbers, greens, cherries, and a bunch of bananas for the marinated pork kebabs. Wow! Exclaimed Betty. Mason's having a worldwide feast. Well, the whole world can wait. But for 2 lovely ladies, I'd be delighted. While Mason grilled kebab vetua cut vegetables, and Adriana closed the table in the gazebo, the young woman suddenly had a strange feeling that they were family. What was it that made her very confused? It even seemed to Adriana that Mason and his mother might be eavesdropping on her thoughts. It would cross her mind, wouldn't it? She chided herself. Who am I to them as a servant? And just plain bad people. The shish kebab is ready, Mason reported to the ceremony, and the women sat down at the table. They ate the bottom kebab, the aroma of which spread throughout the neighborhood, drinking wine and chatting about all sorts of things, and really looked like a friendly, cheerful family. After the 3rd glass, Vetua said, I think I'll go. Wow, I'll walk you out. Adriana perked up and took the woman under her arm and led her into the house. Vetua, maybe I should stay with you, Adriana suggested. No, Adriana. I'm just tired of sitting around. I'd just like to take a nap. I'll be as good as new. You go sit with Mason and socialize. All right, the young woman replied. But if you need anything, be sure to call. Promise. I promise, Vetua smiled weakly. Go on, girl, you could use a little fun. Mason too. Adriana left the room, and Betty looked at her and smiled at her thoughts. Is everything okay? Mason asked when Adriana returned to the gazebo. Your mom says she's just a little tired, she said. Longman nodded and said field wine to himself and Adriana. Mom, how much she's been stretching for me for as long as I can remember her. All she did was fight to make sure I had everything I needed to have a normal childhood. Can you imagine? My mom worked 2 jobs, never went on vacation, took monetary compensation, and ended up compromising her health. I'm glad I had the opportunity to pamper my mom. When she turned 45, I took my mom to a restaurant. You should have seen her eyes. Mom looked at me like I had given her the whole world, and it was worth it. Adriana listened without interrupting and thought what wonderful people they were and how lucky I was to have met them. Once again, she thought. Great, she said aloud, smiling with just her eyes. Too bad. I didn't have that opportunity. My parents left so early, and while they were alive, I had problems. I'm really sorry. With sincere regret, answered Mason, and suddenly covered Adriana's hand lying on the table with her own. But you know what I think? Right now, your parents are looking down from heaven and are happy that your life is getting better. I'm sure you're going to be fine. Let's drink to that. They drank and clinked glasses on high stems. You know, I was set up by my own cousin. With sadness in his voice, Mason said, Is there such a thing? It happens. He sighed. In fact, that's why I got in trouble in business, and in a big way. But never mind. As they say, we'll live. We won't die. And the world is full of opportunities. We'll fight for our place in the sun. Adriana, why don't we take a little walk around the village? It's very beautiful here now. I don't know if that's comfortable. The young woman hesitated. What if Betty needs something? What's the phone for? Yeah, we won't go far. We'll walk around the neighborhood and back. All right. Adriana gave up. She suddenly felt like going for a walk herself. I'll just check on Betty. Okay, Mason replied with a smile, touched by such reverence for their mother. The street was beginning to blow its nose, and Adriana felt a little awkward walking under the arm of a handsome young man, as if they were a couple in love. They reached the huge oak trees. Beside the trees ran grass and bells. Adriana suddenly thought they were tinkling. When my mom and I first moved to the village, I used to love to come here and listen to the sound of those oaks, Mason said. It's really beautiful here. Adriana nodded with a smile. But your eyes are much more beautiful, he said quietly and put his arm around her waist and began to kiss her, first timidly and tenderly, then more and more insistently. Adriana, he whispered. Adriana, Adriana. The young woman, frozen stiff at first, then resolutely wrapped his arms around Mason's neck. It wasn't even a kiss, but a protest of two ravenous people against this cruel and merciless world. They penetrated each other, but it seemed to both of them that no, not close enough. I'm not letting you go anywhere. Longman whispered hotly. I really need you. Now Mason realized this was the woman he had been waiting for, and if Adriana suddenly wanted to leave, he would hold her by force. Mason knew that for sure. They should be together. Mason, don't, Adriana said quietly but firmly. It's not right. But why? I think we need to get to know each other better. And I think we already know each other enough, Longman whispered, taking her hand. There haven't been many women in my life. And do you know why? Because I've never been the type of man to go through the motions looking for the one. I only look at the ones I see as my woman. And now I know I found her. Adriana caught every word Mason said, and she wanted so badly to believe that everything he said was true. 2 failed relationships hadn't gone unrewarded. But better to do it and regret it than not to do it, and then regret it for the rest of your life. Adriana remembered the famous saying and trustingly nestled into the pocket, suddenly feeling like a kitten who found a master after a long wandering. The next day was a day off. Therefore, Mason did not need to go anywhere. At breakfast, Betty glanced furtively at her son and Adriana, and noticing the happy faces of both thought, Lord, make these two be together. Mom, I need to tell you something. Mason smiled. Adriana's eyes widened. Betty mentally thanked the Almighty. It looked like what she had dreamed of was becoming a reality. Anyway, Adriana and I love each other, Mason said. Is that true? Betty exclaimed. God, Mason. Yes, it's the most wonderful news I've heard in over a year. My children, I'm so happy for you. Adriana, what about you? Aya. The young woman couldn't say a word with excitement. Betty, it's true, Adriana replied with an embarrassed smile. I love Mason. Well, that's great. I think this case should be celebrated. Mason, Adriana, maybe we should make a celebratory dinner. Why? My son smiled. Could we? What do you think? Why not? Well, that's great, summed up the happy mother. The festive dinner was lively. Mason joked a lot, laughed a lot, and gallantly courted his girls, as he called his mother and his favorite woman. Betty couldn't remember the last time she had seen her son so happy. I wish they were doing well, the woman thought. After all, they both deserved it. 3 months passed. September was cold. But Mason and Adriana were warmed by their love and the anticipation of happiness. It couldn't be otherwise. 2 weeks ago, Mason brought a valuable package to the office of a young company, and the man sitting in the chair exclaimed in amazement, You're Mason Longman. Mason was confused. He had already forgotten about his former, but belonging to the business crowd. He was terribly embarrassed to appear before a businessman in such a disadvantageous position. But it had already happened. Yes, it's me, he admitted. You have no idea how long I've been looking for you, said the owner of the office, shaking his hand as he stood up sharply from his desk. The young man was hardly more than 25 years old, and to Mason's amazement, he looked at the courier as if he were a celestial. In short, I need a man like you, the man said more slowly and very seriously. I, Jacob, am the head of this company. We are engaged in manufacture of doors and windows. Interesting. He's still asking, thought Mason, who had given up hope of catching on to any possibility. Well, yes, he did, Mason replied discreetly. But doesn't it bother you that no company has wanted to do business with me in the last year? Oh, come on, Jacob said cheerfully. Anyone who is aware of the situation knows where it comes from. Besides, in business as in war, if you don't do it, you do it. And if someone has slipped into a puddle and can't get up, only 1 out of 10 will lend a helping hand. Mason thought with a sad chuckle. Yes, the count was in the tens. On the whole, however, he liked Jacob. He reminded Mason of himself at the beginning of his career. Longman suddenly remembered Jacob, whom he respected as a man and as a professional. So this kid is his son. Well, a worthy successor. Jacob offered Mason a cold juice, after which the men, without delay, discussed the details of cooperation. It had proved fruitful, thanks in large part to Longman. "I'm proud of you," Adriana said when she heard that her lover was back in the fold. "I always knew you would do well," Betty exclaimed, hugging her son. The lovers sat in the restaurant waiting for their order. Mason never tired of admiring Adriana. In the last 3 months, she had gotten prettier. Adriana had a striking appearance, so she hardly used makeup. A little mascara, eyeliner, lipstick, gloss, peach new color of her luxurious brown, and hair Adriana tucked into a high hairstyle and decorated with studs with rhinestones. A diamond like that needs a luxurious setting, Mason thought, looking at her with the loving eyes of a caregiver. But isn't he an idiot? Though, admittedly, she did her job as a nurse with an A+. That's right, that's right. Betty was on the mend, and there was no hint of ill health, and the offer of cooperation Mason regarded as the final chord in the series of troubles. However, that was not all. For Adriana also found a job. Now she is in office, a manager almost by specialty. After all, communicating with people implies a knowledge of psychology. The waiter brought some kind of cold dessert, on top of which an intricate composition of strawberries or mint poems was painted. "Try it," smiled Mason. "I'm not much of a dessert person, as you know. You, on the other hand, have a sweet tooth." Deliciously approved. Adriana pinch off in desserts with a spoon a piece of mass, resembling not then news, not then ice cream. And it's beautiful to eat. It's pathetic. But you eat it. The young woman stabbed, and for dessert on a fork, a berry and whisked. Under one of the juicy berries was a wedding ring. What do you think? Adriana nodded, and the young woman's eyes sparkled. "Aren't you forgetting something?" asked Mason. "No, I haven't forgotten," Adriana laughed. "Mason, for God's sake. This is the 10th time you've asked me that. It's just that I'm a very much in love young man," raised a finger in the air, and grabbing the new bride in an armful, began to kiss. "Don't mess up my hair," Adriana jokingly pleaded. During their banter, Mason's purse and all its contents fell at their feet. Adriana said with a laugh, "And someone's going to ask me for my passport. Where's yours?" "My bad," said the happy groom-to-be. "Now I will correct this oversight." Mason's cell phone rang, and he answered it and whispered to Adriana, "Not as a favor, but as a friend. Please come up to my office. My passport is in the top drawer." Adriana ran up the stairs with a smile, thinking that the image of a businessman suits Mason very well. "He's cool," she thought lovingly. Adriana opened the top drawer of Mason's desk. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a document lying on the desk. Actually, not even a document, but a stamp with a picture of an apartment and the inscription Realtor Agency Maker. It seemed to the young woman that she had definitely seen this seal, and the name of the company is familiar to her painfully. And no wonder, because it was thanks to the firm that Adriana had become homeless. "Oh God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "What is this?" Further, Adriana was afraid to think. The truth was obvious. What to think now? She thought frantically. I won't be able to look him in the eye. Though who should be ashamed of him or me? When Adriana came downstairs, Mason was still on the phone. He smiled at the sight of Adriana, But when she threw at his face the passport and document found on the table, I ran my eyes fearfully. "Excuse me, I'll call you back in a couple minutes," said he to the caller, and rushed off after Adriana late. When Longman ran outside, his favorite woman was already getting into a cab. At that moment, Mason berated himself for buying a house next to a parking lot. What was the use? He was more interested in another question: what fly had bitten Adriana? Apparently, it was the title deed to the apartment of one of the firm's longtime clients. She needed a certificate, and the woman's representative had gone out to Mason. Mason sank powerlessly onto the couch. He seemed to realize what the matter was. After all, Adriana had said that her parents' housing had been found to be in dispute. She probably thought the name of my agency sounded familiar. Did Michael have something to do with this? "Jacob, I have a favor to ask of you," he said as soon as he stepped into Jacob's office. Then, 2 weeks ago, Jacob asked Mason to become a partner. And the best part was that they had become friends. "What's the matter?" Jacob asked. "Mason, is something wrong? You're not wearing your face." Jacob spoke to Longman, trying to sound calm. "I was wondering if you could run me through an old deal." Details later. Mason was strangely thoughtful, looking over the report Jacob had provided. Mason had nothing to do with it at all. "Then what's the matter?" "So did you apply?" Betty asked her son, who had returned from work, and noticing the absence of her future daughter-in-law, asked, "Where is Feroshka?" Adriana interrogated the son, wishing to prolong the time. "Ah, Adriana. And she went on business." "Well, all sorts of wedding troubles. You know." "Mason, are you all right?" Betty asked cautiously. "Something must be abnormal." Mason smiled tautly. "Mason, I've known you for over a quarter of a century," said the wise and perceptive woman, "and I know your every mood. So you don't have to tell me." "Mom, she left quietly," Mason said. "That's it," said her mother. "But what happened? Just so I know." In despair, he exclaimed, feeling humiliation and terrible shame. "Maybe you hurt her in some way. You see, son, sometimes we women get offended, and you men don't understand. What's the matter?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mason shook his head. "But you've seen me dusting Adriana off." "True, I had one thought. But it didn't pan out." "What kind of consideration?" "I told you, it didn't work out. But you did." Meanwhile, Adriana sat on a bench at the Walk of Fame and thought, "Now I won't believe any man. They're all the same." "Adriana." She heard a sympathetic female voice. Adriana slowly looked up and saw a pretty, young, expensively dressed woman who didn't immediately recognize Kathy. Standing next to her former classmate was a stroller with a baby in it. Kathy exclaimed in surprise to Adriana, "What a meeting. I see you have a baby married." Kathy lowered her head. "No, that didn't work out. Remember Benjamin, the guy I was dating when Kathy wasn't finished?" But Adriana understood perfectly. "Yes," she nodded, "I remember." "So," sighed the classmate, "as soon as he found out I was pregnant, he immediately backed off." "Stupid, really stupid," Kathy agreed. "He didn't even realize what happiness he was giving up. My daughter is so cute." "Yeah, well, that's his problem." "How do you look?" "Fine. By the way, I'm the one who sighed at Adriana. And I'm back on the street. I have a good job, but no roof over my head. That's the way it is. Yeah, Lucky is drowned. You know what? Why don't you come to my place this time? No fools. We'll grieve over a woman's unfortunate fate together." Sounds pessimistic, but there is still no choice, Adriana sadly stated. "Churchill, I'm so embarrassed that I asked you out of the apartment guiltily," said the classmate. "Don't." Reed shook his head. "After all, it's your apartment and your personal life. You fought for your happiness as best you knew how. And whoever remembers old times must be the one who gets the eye." "You're a saint," Kathy said thoughtfully. "Not at all," said Adriana. "It's just that most often a problem makes us look at the situation from a different angle. That's the way you want to look at it. But it's not right, Kathy said thoughtfully, listening to her classmate's story. Is he really such an idiot to put a document on the table and then ask you to bring him a passport? Something doesn't add up. But Adriana shrugged. Maybe he'd forgotten the documents were on the table. Maybe so, nodded Kathy. What's the name of the real estate office? Mason wrinkled his nose. Adriana replied, I'll never forget it. Oh, really? No, that can't be right. It's Mason Longman. Player. Either you've got it wrong, or it's not that simple. Yes, Mason Longman was one of the most honest businessmen. Benjamin knew him well. There's a lot of ambiguity there. And there are rumors that his cousins set him up. Longman's innocence was proven, but the real culprit was never found. Well, I mean, he's known. But to this day, no one knows where he is. Lyra froze. She suddenly remembered how Mason had once blurted out that his cousin had set him up. But of course, that had been on the memorable night when she and Mason had first kissed. So it really wasn't Mason's fault. Adriana thought. Miller, I think you two should talk, Kathy insisted. But you're good too. You ran away without joining forces. Well, what was I supposed to do? Nail him to the wall. I could have done that. At least I'd know the truth. Oh, Kathy, I don't know what to think or believe. Adriana sighed. I don't want to believe it, but it's too simple. And being wrong twice about a man is also, you know. There was a baby crying in the next room, and Kathy went to her daughter. So Adriana said to her classmate about 20 minutes later, like I said, you can live. I've got room for everyone. Plus, it's more fun with just the two of us. But personally, I think you should just explain yourself. Yeah, well, I can't advise you on that. You're on your own. A wounded bird. Not true, Adriana thought. Do you have someone to live for? It had been a month since Adriana had moved in with Kathy. The classmate was working remotely. Adriana had quit her job at Mr. Jacobs' firm to take care of the baby. The classmates supported each other as best they could and took turns taking care of the baby. How lucky is she? She thought. She stroked the pads of her fingers, pink, velvety cheeks. After all, she has a child, and I'm not lucky. Kathy had offered a classmate to be Lisa's godmother, and Adriana had been honored. I feel a little dizzy, she said as she walked out of the church and felt nauseous. Maybe it's the smell of incense, the new mom suggested. I get like that sometimes. And Kathy looked at Adriana and noticed you looked pale. Not sick. You know, Kathy, I haven't been feeling well since this morning, she remembered. That's the last time I've ever been sad. Adriana, what else? When was the last time you had one of these cases? Girls, can we get in the car already? The woman, Kathy's mother, pleaded. I'm tired. Me and Lisa squinted. Mom, wait, Kathy waved Kathy away. What do you mean, what business? I don't get it, Adriana. What do you mean, what? Did your friend pull her eyes out? Our once-a-month ladies thing. Wait, what are you saying? That's exactly what I'm saying. Kathy nodded triumphantly. No, Adriana thought for a moment. Of course, I would like it very much, but alas, we have tried for too long, but to no avail. And the doctors did not give any favorable prognosis. Well, my dear, I can name more than one couple who, having already despaired of conceiving, eventually became parents. But why guess? Go to the women's health clinic tomorrow. But let's get in the car. My mom's gonna eat us out of a birthday dinner. Congratulations, Mommy. You're 7 weeks pregnant, smiled a pretty red-headed woman about 35 years old. Are you sure? Adriana asked, confused. It's just that I haven't been able to get pregnant for years. And this? Well, my dear, I've been working for years. I know how to recognize pregnancy. The gynecologist laughed for once. So run along, make your husband a celebratory dinner and tell them the news. Yeah, I will. Oh, thank you. That's a good one. I thought Adriana's marriage wasn't working out. And then there's a relationship that didn't. And here you are. You do realize you owe me an explanation now, don't you? Kathy exclaimed. I'm not one for innuendo. Adriana realized she'd done something stupid, but it was too embarrassing to go to Mason with her tail up and say, "Oh God," and that would make her think I was trying to tie the baby down. Adriana thought with horror. "Lyric, you've got it written all over your face," laughed Kathy. "I bet. Right now you're thinking about the fact that it's not proper for a decent woman to tie a man to a child." Adriana only grinned. A shrewd friend, she thought. "Adriana, answer me one question, yes or no. Do you want to be with Mason?" "But no, well, yes or no," Kathy reminded her. "Yes," Adriana answered and lowered her eyes. "That's what you should dance from. And dance how? I mean, what to do. The answer is obvious. Come and repent Mason on. Or rather, find out what's what. Well, if he's guilty, does the fact that he got off somehow mean nothing? Then Mason had money, connections. Red. Honestly, I want to believe in Mason's innocence, but I'm afraid of being fooled again. I don't understand your position, for the life of me." Kathy shook her hands. "But even if you suspected him, you could have told him openly. What's the point of leaving in English? I don't even understand it anymore." While I was telling Adriana and Kathy, "There's something else. Something else. Yeah, you're a real piece of work. But what have you got? Nothing criminal, I hope." "No," I shook my head. "Not on my part anyway. Anyway, I hid from Mason that I'd been victimized by a con man. After James, I remarried, and my hubby Igor got me an apartment. He turned out to be a marriage and apartment scammer. Now that's interesting. Something tells me, well, it's worth looking into. I've got an idea." "What is it?" Adriana's interested. Adriana's later. Kathy was not a woman who was lucky in her personal life. Though which way to look at it. She was flamboyant, spectacular. On her account was a lot of Masonove, including with a rather enviable fiancé, but with a serious relationship as it did not add up. But what cannot be taken away is a crowd of admirers. So why not take advantage of the connections? So where is it so beautiful, if not a secret? Adriana inquired. When Kathy undressed in an exquisite outfit, the color of ripe cherries with an asymmetrical muzzle hem and one sleeve, concentrated on doing a luxurious makeup. The secret was gone. Kathy, and clutching the scrap, expired sale hurried to the exit, where a cab was waiting for her. Kevin seduce. Kathy smiled at her beau, who was MIA. "I'd like to bring up one not-so-old story. Remember the real estate agency scandal?" Kevin and Kathy were sitting in a small, cozy restaurant styled after a hunting lodge. For Kevin, it was a date he'd spent a third of his paycheck on. For Kathy, it was a business meeting. Although how do you look at it? "Well," hummed Kevin, who had been long ago and hopelessly in love with Kathy. "A very ambiguous case. Yes, and the culprit turned out to be multifarious. This is it," she thought excitedly. "I think I'm on the right track." "You mean in an innocent voice?" Kathy asked. "That's what I mean." The suitor smirked, looking at her with loving eyes. Mason Longman was framed by one Michael Macadam, his cousin. But that's not even the point. This same Macadam goes by several first and last names. "Bingo. Kevin, I love you." Merlot echoed Kathy and sat up to her admirer and kissed him on the cheek. Kevin bloomed. The next day, Adriana sat in the restaurant waiting for her friend. Kathy was indecently late, and she had already pulled out her phone to call her friend. "Hi." She heard an unfamiliar baritone and nodded in surprise. "Hi." Complaint about Adriana. And not being able to think of anything better to do, she added, "I was expecting Kathy." "Kathy will be Kathy," nodded Longman. In the meantime, Mason took out his smartphone and entered the gallery. "Adriana, do you know this man?" he asked, opening the photo in front of him. "I do," stunned. Adriana said, "This is William, my second husband." "I'm sorry. I didn't tell you that he's the reason I ended up on the street. Why didn't you tell me about him?" I was ashamed, she admitted. Ashamed, Mason repeated. In the meantime, if you had told me about it right away, but ideally, you would have mentioned the name of my firm. There wouldn't have been the misunderstanding that happened between us. Yeah, well, whatever. It's just a pigeon. This guy's real name is William Michael Macadam, and he's my cousin, or was he? I have no idea what's happened to him now, or if he's even alive. I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't. With his penchant for adventure and card games, when I reported him to the police, they instantly told me he was also known as Charles Dolgov. Adriana whispered, maybe, smoked, and threw Adriana's cell phone. Notify the owner of the message on Messenger. The young woman smiled. It was a message from Kathy. Don't forget to tell him the important thing. A friend had written. Easy for her to say, Adriana thought. She had to do it anyway, though. Mason. Yes, love my charming, smiled Longman Rim Things, taking Adriana's hand. There's something I need to tell you. I'm listening to you carefully. I must. Oh my God. I've been looking forward to this. And now this. What's the matter? Mason laughed. You think you were hiding some terrible secret from me. In a way I am. Adriana nodded, and then she blurted out, I'm pregnant. Is it true? Longman exclaimed happily. No, I was joking. The young woman pretended to bias. Ask me if I'm sure it's your baby. No. Mason laughed. I'm certainly not gonna ask that. I'm as sure of you as I am of myself. Kevin and Kathy approached them. They're in cahoots. Adriana gasped. That's exactly what Trinity laughed back. Don't forget Lenka. You have to catch the bouquet. It's probably the 10th time, Kathy reminded me. Still, if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't be a wedding. You're my Cupid. Adriana smiled, hugging her friend. I remember everything, but to tell you the truth, I don't see the point of it. Kevin has enough on his plate as it is. He's going to propose to you not today, but tomorrow. I don't know, serenely, smiled her friend and part-time witness. But I want everything to be according to tradition. Adriana, I love you. They heard Mason's voice and looked out the window in friendship. Adriana sent an air kiss to her spouse and Mason waved. You know, Kathy said seriously to the happy bride. Mason once told me that from now on, a happy new life awaits me. And he's right. Cheerfully, Kathy continued and winked. But what's forward to the new life? Yes, replied Adriana with a smile. At that moment, the young woman was more confident than ever that all the hard trials were behind her and her life was finally on a white streak. After all, this time, she had the most wonderful man in the world by her side.
Subscribe and click the bell.
If Molly had ever been told, even in a delusional dream, that she would choose such a dress for her wedding, she would have laughed. But now, standing in the fitting room and looking at the ruffles on the dress, she was sure it was just right. Let's arrange a photo shoot for you, Kathy said excitedly. Like you're all dirty Cinderella in a floor cloth, sitting in some back alley, this will be the first part of the photo shoot. And then I'll shoot you at the wedding, where you're all of yourself, such a queen, going to the groom in love. That would be the bomb. No one usually looks at wedding photos, and you'll show them to your grandchildren. Molly listened to Kathy and realized that there was no way to get rid of her crazy idea, so it was better to save her nerves and agree. Kathy was a stubborn and persistent girl. Probably, if she were just a friend, everything would be solved easier. Molly would just stop communicating with her. But what to do if this glamorous tank got you as a sister? Actually, they were only half-sisters. Kathy was her father's daughter from his first marriage. Molly treated her evenly, even with some sympathy, but she would hardly be friends with such a person. The girls were too different in character and upbringing. If it weren't for Daddy, Molly thought for the umpteenth time. If only Dad hadn't been so stubborn, I could have kept a cool sibling relationship. But Dad had gotten it into his head that his daughters had to be best friends. Dad, we're very different from each other, and she's 10 years older than me. What do we have in common? We didn't even watch the same cartoons when we were kids. Molly, I've had this conversation about every few months or so. I don't count on my father's understanding. Kathy likes one thing and I like another. We can't even decide what movie to watch. She likes dresses and I like jeans. She likes Asian food and I'm allergic to seafood. I mean, no, I'm nice to her, but we just have nothing to be friends about. Dad, as usual, remained adamant. If you need a reason to be friends, you can consider blood relation a good reason. You're still young, Molly. You don't understand a lot of things. Dad, are you sure? The girl snorts. Why do you think so? Because, nonchalantly answered the father. Because I'm older than you and I've seen a lot of things in my life, more than you can imagine. And I know all too well that partners, friends, buddies, all that is good, but how many of them will stay by your side in a difficult moment? It's good if it's one too, but family people won't let you down. One's own friend is one's own friend. And now I had to agree to a stupid photo shoot. Go early in the morning to some creepy second-hand store on the outskirts of town and try on the creepy rag Kathy had picked out. The dress, once white, had lost its color, probably 20 to 30 years ago. Now it looked dirty gray, and in some places there were yellow spots. These were located in the armpit area, and gray-brown, which had a place of honor on the straps and hem. The zipper on the back had obviously been replaced at some point. Otherwise, how else to explain the fact that the zipper was not white or even gray in the tone of the dress color? The zipper was scarlet, and from afar, it could appear as a bloody scratch on the bride's back. Vintage, proudly announced the saleswoman, showing Molly this amazing outfit. Now such a thing is in trend. That's why we decided not to display it in the general hall. You know, customers are different. They grab it with dirty hands. They can even tear it carelessly, and things are rare and, not cheap. Molly nodded, not giving away her amazement at the sight of this masterpiece. It's really exclusive, she said seriously. I've never seen anything like it before. I'll tell you more and you will not see. Joyfully praised the saleswoman. I know what you're thinking right now. You think I want to sell you a shabby old thing, cheap, for the price of a new thing, don't you? Don't answer that. I know that's what you're thinking. But if you try this thing on and compare it to any other similar item from any other store, you'll see the difference. You don't believe me? Then go to the fitting room. Molly, indignant at the saleswoman's insistence, did not object. Of course, this lady has a vested interest. She probably makes no salary, lives on a percentage of sales. There were no customers here, not a single one in half an hour. And who needs second-hand? Located in an industrial zone and squeezed between garages, which ingenious owners converted into a flea market. In 2 garages from here they sold potatoes, and in the next garage they sold fruit. The garage opposite the second was decorated with a huge sign, Shoemaker's Workshop, and to the left of it a man dressed in a tracksuit, judging by his crimson nose and cheeks, drinking heavily, was seated on a low stool. Right in front of him were 2 wooden crates. On one of them were piled a huge pile of brooms for the bath. On the second crate were small bunches of flowers, the height of a woman's palm. The small red-orange flowers, which were abundant in every front garden, suggested that the merchant was probably there to replenish his stock. Walking through this improvised market, mostly pensioners and even women of indeterminate age with a bunch of children. What can I say? To work in such a place, and the enemy would not wish. Should we be surprised at the eagerness of the saleswoman? The fitting room was the far side of the garage, separated from the sales floor by a curtain on a rope. Molly pulled the curtain, leaving her alone with a rectangular mirror leaning against the wall. "If you want, I'll give you shoes," the saleswoman shouted from behind the curtain. "You'll be able to evaluate the whole image. Here, girl, take them." And from behind the curtain, a woman's hand holding the shoes appeared from the side. The shoes were large in size, pointed toe, and without backs, but they did have heels, and even too high. "Thank you." Molly decided to be polite by all means, though she wanted to send this annoying person away. The dress was indeed impressive. Besides the color, the stains, the bright red zipper, it had a few other interesting features. First, the neckline, which was supposed to be asymmetrical, was symmetrical without measure. Because of this, any, even balletic posture, automatically began to seem skewed. Secondly, not only the bodice and hem, but also the waist of the dress were decorated with ruffles. The caterpillar effect. Molly laughed. "I always wondered what I would look like if I sat on chips and hamburgers and mayonnaise." Besides, the previous owner of this vintage luxury was clearly shorter than Molly, 10 pounds shorter, the hem of the skirt not reaching her ankles. In this, the girl thought, there's an upside to that too. Even in rainy weather, the hem in a puddle will not get dirty. "What's up? How's it going?" The sales girl called her again, and Molly resolutely pulled the curtain back into the hall. "How do you like me?" she asked and spun on the spot, spreading her arms apart. "Do I look good?" "Does it look good?" the saleswoman exclaimed. "You ask me, girl. It looks great on you. It's unbelievable. You look like a fairy tale princess. What a waist. I can't take my eyes off it. And the lace, the ruffles, so delicate, so delicate. How can you not go for it?" "No way." Molly caught the eye of the broom and flower merchant. The expression on the man's face was more eloquent than any words. He looked at the girl, slightly opened his mouth. In his gaze mixed bewilderment and pity. "It happens." That's what was written on his face in arched letters. For a second he squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head, as if to see if he had seen Molly in that outfit. "I'll take that dress." The girl smiled. "Just find me a bag of some kind." How nice to deal with such customers. The saleswoman blossomed. Now, when the intense desire to impose a purchase, replaced by the joy of the deal, she relaxed and spoke almost sincerely. And Molly suddenly noticed that the saleswoman was definitely not more than 30, and she was even very pretty. "When you came in, I immediately saw that you are a tasteful, understanding girl. I have a good eye. I've been working here for a while." The price to be paid for the purchase was unreasonably high. Molly realized that if you haggle, then surely you can get a significant discount. Who else, for God's sake, would need this work of sartorial art? But she didn't feel like haggling. She was already tired of this store, of this miserable neighborhood, where everything was as dull, as lightless, as gray as the wedding dress for which she had just paid a fabulous amount of money for such a rag. If it were possible to teleport from here, slap, and you are already in another place, preferably in her favorite coffee shop, where the cozy light, the tabletop of pink marble, the exquisite coffee aroma wafting over the cup, made of inconceivably fine porcelain. And then there is the sweet waitress Betty. She always smiles so genuinely at Molly. And Michael is a true wizard, a master of vanilla chocolate magic, always saving a few chocolate hearts with apricot filling. These are your favorites. I've set aside the best ones, and she'll make a caramel cheesecake sauce especially for her. That's where I'm going. the girl instantly decided as she left the store. The seller of flowers and brooms sympathetically smiled at her and then took one of his polo wilted bouquets in his hands. "Here you go. This is for you. No money. You do not look that they wilted, the goods first grade. When you put them in water at home, they'll come to life." "Thank you," Molly mumbled, accepting the street vendor's gift. "I wish you a good trade." She squeezed between the makeshift stalls, hurrying to get to the corner where she had left the car, but, as luck would have it, it began to rain frequently, and the few market visitors hurried away, trying to hide from the damp, and the vendors rushed to cover the trays with plastic sheeting. Several times Molly ran into the same elderly woman who was walking from one stall to another, talking loudly on the phone. She had her head wrapped in a plastic bag, so she wasn't afraid of getting wet. But Molly, it seemed to her, was deliberately getting in the way and making it difficult to move. "You're everywhere, aren't you?" shouted the woman after another collision with the girl. "Why are you following me? What do you want?" "Sorry, I didn't do it on purpose." Almost crying, Molly replied. No one had ever raised her voice, and the rudeness of the pensioner frightened her. But not 10 pounds away, she could see the corner where the car was waiting, and that gave her strength. "Excuse me." Once again she repeated, rushing forward. "I'm so sorry." Something was shouted at her back, but Molly didn't stop to answer. "Hurry, get out of here." Already in the car, Molly noticed that she was clutching the wet bouquet in her hand. How disgusting! She irritably threw the flowers on the back seat. Nothing in just half an hour she would be in the warmth, among smiles and wonderful aromas, and could forget this nightmarish morning. The coffee shop was still empty at this hour. Usually the place began to fill up after noon, when the socialites, tired from last night's party, woke up and wanted to gossip. There were plenty of guests, but newcomers often appeared. Betty always recognized them by their tired grace, their lack of makeup, and their requests for plaid. The girls, they always looked like girls no matter how old they were moving around in their oversized sweaters, wrapped their palms around huge mugs of hot chocolate, and didn't forget to take selfies with their phones. The amazing thing is, these ladies always had some kind of party the night before, after which they needed to get some sleep. And there was never a morning where they had nothing to discuss. After 3:00 p.m., it was time for stylish, well-groomed business ladies. Even here, while eating delicate desserts, they never let go of their phones and tablets for a second. Business comes first. "Michael is the best pastry chef in the coffee shop," Betty confided. "Most businesswomen quickly become overweight. And you know why? They eat without distractions, so they pass it on. Here you ate a piece of cake, and you didn't taste it because you were distracted by an urgent call at the time. Is that a shame? Yes, it is. You have to order more. But then there's another call that you can't miss. So if you want to stay slim, don't let yourself be distracted while eating." In the evenings, the crowd here was mixed, and that was the busiest time. And early mornings, that was the time for Molly and a few other early birds. Today, however, Molly was running late. "Has our princess shown up yet?" Michael peeked out of the kitchen. Betty shook her head. "No, I don't think she will." "Don't you read the news?" Michael grinned. "The news," in the tone of an oracle, he said. "Reading is bad for you. I'm not ready to soak up negative emotions and poison the food I cook with them." The waitress snorted. "He's always like that. You never know if he's joking or serious." The bell on the door rang melodiously, and there was no time to explain. Molly, slightly drenched in rain, appeared on the doorstep of the coffee shop. "Good morning." Betty smiled. "You must be cold." Shall I bring you a blanket while your order is being prepared?" "Yes, please do." The girl hurried to her favorite spot. It was not a deep alcove in the wall with a beige-brown sofa covered with cushions. On the shelves stylized under stone ledges smiled with affectionate warmth, lamps, candles. On the sofa loved to lounge on the general favorite, a luxurious Persian cat. A couple of years ago, someone from the staff brought here a blue-eyed Persian kitten, red-brown in color. At that time, this institution was not as successful as it is now, but with the appearance of a fluffy kitty, the situation has changed. Visitors began to be attracted here like a magnet. The little one was named Praline and was allowed to walk around the hall whenever she wanted. She became the mascot of the coffee house, and a funny belief quickly spread among the guests. A good day awaits the one to whom the beautiful Praline will jump on the lap. This time the cat was not in its usual place. She had gone somewhere since last night. Betty explained sadly, "She'll probably come back, maybe even pregnant. We hadn't sterilized her. She will." Molly said, "Don't look so sad, Betty. Would you like me to take your mind off things for a while? My girlfriends and I decided to have a Cinderella-style photo shoot at our bachelorette party. You won't believe where I went to find the right dress. By the way, it's not very far from here, but Betty, you should have seen it. Can you believe it? There's garages and garages and garages and garages, and each one's been converted into a store. But store is a bit of a mouthful. The people there are wild, not people, but goblins. But I found the dress. In general, if you want a thrill, you don't need to watch horror movies anymore. Just go to those places. You won't regret it. You've never been there? No?" Betty shrugged her shoulders and smiled crookedly. "Why not? I've lived there since I was a kid. And my daddy has a store in one of those garages, too. He sells vegetables and fruit, and they're always the freshest and tastiest." Molly blinked helplessly. "I should have said that." Who was pulling her tongue? "I'm sorry, Betty. I didn't mean to. I'm used to other places, and I said it out of surprise." "Oh, how could I do that?" "I'm sorry again." The waitress nodded dryly. "Your order will be ready in a minute." Molly shook her head tiredly. What kind of day was this? Such a horrible day. Some grandmother had yelled at her. She'd gotten soaked in the rain, and now Betty had hurt her for nothing. Molly, not unlike many of her friends and even her half-sister, was brought up strictly. Kathy was always yelling at the driver in the cab, calling sales assistants stupid, and the pedicure master could easily get from her a poke with her foot for not evenly trimmed cuticle. That wasn't the case with Molly. She still remembered the fight her father had gotten her into when she, an 11-year-old Moshorka, in a fit of teenage rebellion, had once sassed her nanny. Rules of behavior were not invented by fools. They're there so people can interact without any silly scandals. Molly yawned. She hated lectures, and she found her father's calm demeanor intolerable. Just once he'd lost his temper, screamed, broken something, but Dad never lost his temper. "And I am bored with life, without any silly scandals," daringly she answered, looking her father in the eye. He was not confused, did not tremble. "Then scandalize with your girlfriends. But if a person works for you, it does not give you any right to humiliate him." My father said then. "First of all, because only plebeians behave like that. A man from a decent society would never allow himself to stoop like that. Besides, you mustn't forget that the nanny can quit and get a job with another family the very next day. And we'll have to spend a lot of time before we find a decent replacement. Is your precious Kathy a common plebeian too?" Molly asked in an innocent tone. "I'm not prepared to discuss it." Father cut her off. But neither do I intend to repeat the same parenting mistakes I made with Kathy, and now you'd better apologize to your nanny." To better learn the lesson, the father for 2 weeks deprived Molly cash pocket money and forbade the use of credit cards. Subsequently, the girl was convinced many times that her father's teachings were not wasted. Molly finally made sure of it in his 17 years. When it was time for the first love, the guy she was in love with all through the school year invited her to a cafe. The girl couldn't remember herself from happiness, but all her love unknowingly evaporated when she saw how rude to the waitresses the young man. In the young waitress, the guy threw a plate because he thought there were frozen vegetables in the salad. Molly tasted the salad as well, and the vegetables were fresh. Apparently, the young man decided to impress in this way. The waitress was replaced, the salad was apologized for, but the matter did not end there. Her suitor had a new idea of fun. Now he was mocking the young man who served them juice. As soon as the waiter turned his back for a moment, the jolly boy knocked the glass to the floor. "Why do you always put the glasses on the very edge of the table?" He was indignant. "Don't they teach you anything at all?" Molly left before dinner was over. Dazed admirer ran after her all the way to the exit, and all persuaded to say what she did not like so much, but she would not answer him. To her father's question as to why she had returned so soon, Molly answered briefly, "He is a plebeian," and no further explanation was needed. But now she herself had behaved worse than any plebeian. Shame on her! The girl did not immediately realize that someone was staring at her, and therefore she even flinched when she saw the blue cat eyes watching her intently from under the table. "Sweet Candy, is that you? How you scared me!" Molly leaned over to the cat. "It's so good to have the kitty back. Maybe it's a sign that the rest of the day is going to turn out well. Come here, kitty cat. Here, kitty, 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 kitty." The cat ignored the guest's flirtations, wagged its tail lazily, and turned away. "Oh, come on. What happened? Didn't you recognize me?" Pralin didn't even turn her head in the girl's direction and walked leisurely past her toward the kitchen. For some reason, this arrogant feline indifference was offensive. "Your order." Betty placed a cup of coffee and a plate with an impressive piece of cheesecake on the table. Molly smiled, almost pleadingly, at the waitress. She was still terribly embarrassed about her rudeness, but the main thing was that she really felt good about Betty and didn't want to offend her. She touched the edge of her plate with her finger. "Did Michael make the sauce especially for me?" she said. She asked, just to make a point. Betty did not respond to her smile. "The chef's sauce is a separate charge, and it's priced accordingly. You'll probably have to save money now, but you don't have to pay for the coffee." "What?" Molly looked up at the still face Betty. "I don't understand." "I already apologized, didn't I?" The waitress allowed herself to smile with the tips of her lips. "Information gets into the news quickly, and we're goblins, but we're literate." "What information?" "Yeah, what are you talking about?" "Coffee's on the house." "Cold," repeated Betty. "Bon appetit." Praline followed the waitress, giving Molly a contemptuous look. What was Betty saying? What kind of information? What kind of news? Molly pulled out her phone, hoping to make sense of the overly complicated innuendo. News, then. The screen flashed alarmingly with 28 missed calls. Yeah, of course she hadn't heard. She was always forgetting her phone in the car. Good thing she hadn't forgotten it now. The girl opened the full list of missed calls. There was only one number on it. "Dad, I left my phone in the car. I didn't hear anything." "Did something happen?" "I see." Dad sighed. "You still don't look at the news, Dad?" She was getting nervous. For some reason, everyone is always talking about the news. Isn't it hard to tell a human what happened? Dad didn't answer. Dad, where are you? Can you hear me? Yes. Dad was speaking very clearly now, almost separating the syllables. I can hear my daughter. I'm sorry, Molly, but you're gonna have to go through this life without my support. Yeah, what are you talking about? Nervousness turned to panic, and the feeling grew stronger that this was all just a stupid prank. Why are you always talking in riddles? What happened? Everything happened. Dad exploded and Molly got it. No, it's not a prank. Her dad, always so poised, so reasonable, yelled into the phone, which had never happened before. I don't have any more money. Do you realize that? I'm broke, and you're broke with me. Do you get it? Finally, my father hung up the phone. Molly stared at the dim screen of her cell phone for a few seconds, then awkwardly rose from her seat. The bill, she shouted. As if by magic, Betty appeared beside her. Here you go. Molly threw a credit card on the table. Just a minute. Betty smiled politely. I apologize, but your card is blocked. Molly shook her head. That's impossible. Try again. The waitress repeated all the manipulations with the card. I'm sorry, but your card is blocked. Molly slowly sank down on the couch. So it's true? She said to no one in particular. She searched all her pockets. There was some cash in one of them. Here, take this. It will probably be enough, won't it? Prowlin, following Betty everywhere, snorted. Come here, kitty. Molly called to her pitifully. Will you at least take pity on me? But the cat defiantly turned away. It seems we are no longer loved here. Molly whispered, and she didn't realize whether she was trying to make a joke or had accidentally voiced an unpleasant truth. Molly walked out of the coffee shop and headed for the car. Kathy was already flooding her sister with messages. Her cards, of course, had been blocked too, and she was now in a near hysterical state, sniping Molly's phone. Come over here soon. She cried into the receiver. Pay for my shopping. I'm at the checkout line at the mall. I've got tons of stuff, and none of my cards work. Well, who'd doubt it? Her sister's ability to spend all day at the mall was well known. I'm sorry, Kathy, Molly interrupted her. I can't help you right now. I have exactly the same story, and you have no conscience. The sister almost roared. There's a line of people here, all freaking out, and I'm standing here like a beggar. I'm ashamed, so give up shopping. The girl got angry. I don't have any money. Okay, bye. There was no doubt Kathy would call back, and then call back 10 or even 20 more times. Just put it on auto dial, hoping to harass the recipient so he'd eventually break down and pick up. But I didn't have time for that right now, and I'm getting married tomorrow. Molly suddenly remembered. The thought of the imminent wedding was crushing, and the girl burst into tears, burying her forehead into the steering wheel. Even this morning, life had been very different. In this life, Molly was the daughter of a more than well-to-do man, and she had everything she could ever want. A young, spoiled girl, fancy clothes, an expensive car, and the latest model phone, lots of girlfriends, traveling and partying. In this life, the future was as plain and simple as the change of seasons. She would marry James because their fathers are best friends and longtime business partners. When one of them had a son and the other a daughter, they decided that their children would marry as soon as they were in their 20s. From an early age, Molly knew she would become James' wife and did not resist it. Dad, smart, sensible as ever, explained to her that it was best for everyone. Of course, he said, I know that most people prefer to choose their own spouse. And that's not stupid when it comes to people living ordinary lives. Their children become grown up and independent early. They have to decide who to study for and whether to study at all. They barely out of high school start earning and learning to live on their earnings while trying to help their parents. They gain experiences that neither you nor James have. You grew up like rare flowers in a greenhouse. How are you supposed to know what kind of person you want in a family? You don't even know yourself yet. We've tried to raise you for each other, me and Father James. I can't promise you the euphoria of marriage, but I think you'll live peacefully. Besides, you won't have to worry about money. The wedding will be a good opportunity to merge our companies, and one of your heirs will take over the business in the future. Do you have any objections? What about love? Out of sheer stubbornness, the girl asked. The father shrugged his shoulders. Love the lottery. It's not wise to take risks when there's too much at stake. Business reputation, fortune. Finally, the physical, mental health of future children. If you want bad adventures so badly, you can always arrange it carefully. Brutal male with iron muscles can easily turn out to be weak and whiny in everyday life. Wouldn't it be easier to limit yourself to a few encounters with him and then go back to your reliable husband? The only thing you have to do is make sure your spouse doesn't find out. Then he won't let you in on the details of his adventures either. Show respect for each other, and everything will work out fine. Dad was always very rational. Molly nodded, realizing she had nothing to say and didn't want to. She liked James. She wasn't in love with him, of course, but she liked the sympathy even better. It filled her with peace and confidence. And now there was no more confidence or peace in the world. The image of James presented itself to her in her mind, full-figured, dark-haired, with a soft look and a shy smile. She'd never been particularly interested in what he did for a living, where he went, who his friends were. Their relationship was more like that of people living in a marriage of many quiet years. Returning from any shopping, Molly invariably brought a gift, and for the groom, congratulated on all holidays, gave not important, but pleasant little things. From each trip, she brought a souvenir for the groom. He politely thanked her and kissed her on the cheek. Every morning, the girl received a message wishing her a good day, and they always spent Valentine's Day together in some romantic place, and we'd never even had a real kiss. What's kissing? We were never alone with him. I wonder why. Molly suddenly thought. And this discovery turned out to be so wild, abnormal, that the girl could not stand it and laughed out loud. From the street, it must have looked strange. Behind the wheel of an expensive car sat a young girl with tears on her cheeks and laughed heartily. Betty, peering at Molly from the window of the coffee shop, shrugged. The rich have their quirks. She was roaring like a mad beluga, and now she was laughing. Praline meowed affirmatively. Kathy looked angrily at the stairs leading to the second floor. She managed to get out of the mall without too much loss. When her sister had disconnected her phone, making it impossible for her to reach her, Kathy didn't hesitate for a moment. After all, there were plenty of contacts in her phone. James, hi, honey. She shouted as soon as her call was answered. James, I've got a favor to ask of you. Help me out, future relative. I have something with my card. I can't pay for my shopping, and I've got a lot of stuff for the wedding. Please help me out. Just don't wire me any money, but come here yourself. I'm at the mall right now. The mall. James listened patiently and wrote down the address. Okay, Kathy, I'll be there. Don't worry about a thing. He saw her, barely crossing the threshold of the mall. Kathy waved at him with countless packages. I'm here. "Here!" she shouted. For nothing really. There was no need to attract attention. It was impossible to miss the bright red coat anyway. James smiled, appreciating the extent of the shopping. "You're buying up the whole store, aren't you?" "Along with the warehouse?" "Not the whole store, just the stuff I liked." The girl said nonchalantly, "What can I do?" "I don't want to look pale at my only sister's wedding." He glanced again at the boxes and bags. "Is that why you bought 8 pairs of shoes and 24 evening gowns? Are you really going to wear them all at the same time?" He was teasing her, but his smile was so kind that it was impossible to take offense. Count, math genius. Kathy laughed. "You just don't understand anything about women." I couldn't decide which outfit I liked best, so I decided to think about it at home in peace. "What can I count on you for?" "Here you go." James sighed and took out a bank card from his wallet. "I really don't know much about women." "You're right about that. But I know one thing for sure, you can't say no to anything." Kathy looked at him carefully and smiled broadly, though a little sadly. "Such happiness, Molly, will come to you," she said with a little regret and added more quietly, "Why? Why not me? You'll be lucky." James replied and cheerfully picked up the numerous purchases. "You'll get a fiancé that will make all your girlfriends jealous." "Come on." Kathy didn't move. "What about you?" She touched James' hand lightly. "Are you going to be jealous of the guy who gets me?" James was confused and took a step backward, bumped his back against one of the customers, mumbled a crumpled apology. "Yeah," he said with all his might, trying to keep his tone casual. "I'm a married man, so I'm not supposed to be jealous of other men's husbands, even if they are married to gorgeous women." "It pleases me that you think I am a gorgeous woman," said Kathy, still in the same special quiet voice, which for some reason on the skin ran goosebumps. "Yes, of course I do. Shall we go? You probably have a lot of important things to do." James hurried off. Cosmetology and manicures, and of course, picking out an outfit for tomorrow. "Can you give me a ride?" Kathy asked him. "I won't even be able to pay for a cab until I get my card sorted out. This is so stupid." Kathy lived in a huge studio with panoramic windows. The view was amazing. The river and forest on the other side. How beautiful it must be here in winter. "There's a second floor here, too," said the girl, letting James into the hallway. "There used to be a communal house here, and before that, the house belonged to some aristocrat, long ago under the Tsar. When I grew up, Dad bought 2 apartments for me, one right above the other. So I live in a 2-story palace all by myself." "Isn't it boring?" James asked. "You don't even have a dog." Kathy laughed, kicked off her shoes, and strode across the room with a dancing step. "I'm not often home," she said. "The dog would probably die of homesickness." "I see." James stomped awkwardly in place. "Where should I put your bags?" "I'll go. I don't want to take you away from your business." Kathy waved her hand. "Throw them somewhere, anywhere, and they won't get away from me. I'm not letting you go without a cup of tea." "Oh no, thanks. No objections. I've got to do something to thank you. And my tea is very special. I bet you've never tasted anything like it." "Really?" James smiled. "Shall we test it?" Kathy winked. A small table on wheels, beautifully set, with 2 cups and a vase of candy, Kathy stopped at the window, between 2 armchairs. "I like to sit here," she said simply. "Both in the evening and in the morning, really. I like coffee in the morning. I have an original predilection, don't I?" Kathy laughed. "Well, try it already, and don't you dare say it doesn't taste good." "What is it?" James blinked as he took a sip from the cup. The flavor of the drink was strange, not at all like tea. It was more like something between sweet baby fizz and herbal infusion. Kathy genuinely enjoyed the effect. My personal recipe: a tea with white rose petals, orange zest, chocolate shavings, and a pinch of pepper. Pepper? James swallowed hard and took another sip. Yeah, she is beautiful. James thought suddenly, why didn't I notice it before? I'm so embarrassed. She said quietly, did Molly tell you everything? Did she? No. James shook his head. She didn't. What difference does it make? Yeah, it probably doesn't. You're probably right. Kathy slowly twirled a strand of hair around her finger. There was something mesmerizing about the motion. Would you like some more tea? She offered. I'll get some. James suddenly felt a little dizzy. For some reason, he wanted to get up and leave immediately. But suddenly Kathy's face, her soft, plump lips, were right next to him. How had it happened? She'd just been sitting in the chair. So you know everything and you're going to marry her after all? She whispered, almost touching his face. Now she was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees. You'll be lucky, Kathy. James muttered again. The girl remained silent. You'll be lucky. James gently stroked Kathy's soft golden hair. Her bright blue eyes seemed huge and looked so helpless. Meanwhile, Molly dialed her sister's number for the third time. Where had she gone? Kathy always kept her cell phone handy and never turned it off. Yes, but it was too late to leave. The intercom rang, announcing that all avenues of escape were now cut off. It's Molly. Kathy whispered. Okay, go to the second floor and sit there like a mouse. Quiet as a mouse. Quiet as a mouse, you understand. Molly stood on the doorstep, crumpling a bag with something soft inside. The rustling sound was so loud that Kathy covered her ears with her hands. Stop it, she shouted. Don't rustle. Molly, without waiting for an invitation, went into the kitchen. Well, that's better. At least she stopped rustling. Do you have guests? Asked the girl, noticing the second cup on the table. Kathy smiled conspiratorially at her sister. There were guests, and I didn't have time to put the dishes away, and I haven't made the bed after the guests. Even the sheet didn't overpower. You know how I like to get rid of stress, don't you? What about you? Called James yet? Molly looked at Kathy absently, as if she hadn't immediately remembered who James was, and shook her head slowly. No, I haven't, and he hasn't called me. I don't even know if there's going to be a wedding now. Maybe now. Well, after what happened, he'll change his mind about marrying me. Would that make you sad? Kathy asked. Imagine your fiancé calling you now and telling you there's no wedding. Would you be upset? James, who was lurking on the second floor, turned to listen, but for a long time there was complete silence downstairs. Had they fallen asleep? Are you going to be upset or not? Kathy asked again. Molly shrugged. I'll be upset. I guess I'll be upset. I'm so used to the idea of us getting married that I can't imagine anyone else. But that's not what I'm thinking about right now. I'm trying to figure out how to move on. I guess I should get a job, but I don't know what to do. I've never worked before. I don't even know what it's like. And my dad, what's he gonna do? I'm afraid he'll start drinking, like from the shock. Maybe we should tell Mom. Why don't she come and stay here till Daddy gets over all this trouble? No, wait. You're thinking about the wrong thing. Her sister interrupted her. If you marry your James tomorrow, you won't have to think about any work. And then you can help your father, and nothing will change for you. And if I don't marry him? Molly replied sullenly, will there be a wedding at all? You know, this is so stupid. Today at 4 o'clock I have to go to the dressmaker to pick up the dress and pay for it, of course, and I have nothing to pay with. And now I don't even know if I need this dress. What? You have no money at all? Kathy gasped. Not even any cash left. That can't be true. No way. I spent the last of my cash on something. I can't remember what. Molly lost her forehead. Her mind was jumbled. I remember. I paid for the coffee at the coffee shop before my dad called me. So now the only dress I can afford is this one here. She rustled the bag again, which contained a hideous dress from secondhand. James grinned bitterly. It was still a shame that Molly had come to her sister's house instead of his. It would have been normal for her to go to her fiancé first, to seek support from him. Would he have refused her? Isn't that what people do? And himself. Immediately he objected to himself. He knew what had happened and had not even called her. He thought she would call him herself. He didn't want to pry into her soul. But is that the way to put the question when you know that someone close to you is in trouble? I'm an asshole. The conclusion he came to was disappointing. It turned out that he and Molly were not close people. Close people do not behave like that. A long time ago in high school, he had fallen head over heels in love with his neighbor. The girl's parents were not very sociable people, and for 6 months in a new neighborhood, they never met anyone. Their daughter hadn't made any friends either, and it seemed she'd never even talked to anyone. James had no idea how to approach this arrogant little thing, but chance came to the rescue. They had met at a dog-walking area, and the Spitz, which the beautiful neighbor was leading on a thin leash, suddenly broke free and ran away. James rushed after it. The puppy wasn't used to physical exertion, so it took a couple of minutes to catch him. Hold your pet. The girl nodded, then pulled a small notebook out of her pocket and quickly wrote a few words in it. Thank you for helping catch Klaus. He read as the girl handed him the notepad. I'm mute. My name is Lisa. Soon he and Lisa became firm friends. It turned out that the girl's parents were mute, too, and that was why, not because of arrogance as he had thought at first, they didn't socialize with anyone. Now, right after school, he and Lisa would rush to the park and sit on a bench for long hours, exchanging notes. And then one day it was over. Tomorrow my parents and I are leaving here forever. She wrote in her notebook. Tomorrow. Where are you going and why? To my grandmother's. Lisa wrote, Daddy says it's the right thing to do. That was all she could get out of her. Now, after all these years, James remembered his mute girlfriend and regretfully realized that even he knew more about her than he did about his fiancée. And his relationship with Lisa had been much more intimate and trusting than with Molly. Congratulations, you idiot. You realized it on the eve of your own wedding. He walked downstairs to the girls at the very moment Molly, wearing her Cinderella dress, was slowly turning around in front of her sister. Do you like it? She asked Kathy. I don't think I've ever seen anything worse in my life, much less worn. It's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen. James said loud and clear, and you are beautiful, and always will be. In any dress. Molly turned sharply toward him. James, when you came in, I didn't hear anything? I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to scare you. I've been here the whole time, just on the second floor. And you and me. He walked over to Molly and took her hand. We have a lot to talk about. I just realized that we don't know each other at all. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. What do you mean? Kathy smiled wryly. For some reason, her face was completely distorted from that skewed, evil smile, which was more like a grin. Such a beautiful, gentle face, it suddenly turned into an ugly mask. We're in the middle of a revelation, she sang softly. That's good. Before the wedding, it is better to know everything about each other. Oh, you two are so good. James, dear, I propose to begin by explaining to our little Molly what you are doing here and why you were hiding from her on the second floor. Will you? Molly, not understanding, looked at her sister, then at her fiancé. He stood with his eyes downcast. Aya, is there something I don't know? She asked. What is she talking about? What are you doing with her? James took her by the shoulders and turned her around to face him. I cheated on you, Molly. At least I think I did. I don't remember the details, though. And no, I never thought about it before. I don't know how it happened. He started hitting on me. I shrieked, Kathy. No, he didn't. James replied calmly. Kathy suggested that I try some special tea. It made me dizzy and drowsy and weak. Yeah. Kathy snorted. Weakness, drowsiness, listen to him. He will now tell how I seduced him myself, deprived him of his innocence, poor thing. Kathy? Ignoring the comments, James continued. She was very upset about about what happened to your father. She was sitting here on the floor with her head in my lap. I don't remember the rest of it. I woke up naked with her next to me. Molly slowly, like a wind-up doll, turned to face Kathy. After all, you are my sister, she said quietly. How could you? And why would you do that? Sister? She laughed shrilly and turned away to the window. You've always been a bit naive, Molly, Kathy said without turning around. No, it's not even naive. You've always been a complete idiot. Look at you and me. What kind of sisters are we? We have nothing in common, not a single trait, and my mother. Have you ever seen her? Ever wonder where she is? Did our father ever think of her? Kathy turned to Molly and James. Slender, tall, golden-haired, but so alien. I am not your father's daughter, she said, raising her voice slightly. I'm his mistress. Molly didn't answer. She just stared at Kathy with widened eyes, tiny beads of sweat beading on her forehead. She could feel it. Kathy, James began firmly. Calm down and stop talking nonsense. Don't you realize what you're saying? Don't know what I'm saying, she said mockingly. Honey, I haven't even told you half of it yet. How about the fact that I'm not a stranger to your worthy parent either? Are you really my sister? James smiled. Or maybe a mother or grandmother, just to be clear? I'm neither, kid. The blonde didn't hesitate. I've been sleeping with your daddy for a long time. And now let's think, Molly, how come your father, a wealthy, serious man, went bankrupt in one day? Use your brain, dummy. These things never happen in 1 second. Someone has been digging under him for months, maybe even years, gathering and sorting information, finding weaknesses. And that someone needed a spy in the enemy camp. Someone with access to everything, to all the secrets. Someone trusted. Who do you think it could be? Think, Molly. A person who's trusted, who can access anything if he wants to, and no one would suspect him. Are you saying it's you? James laughed. That's bloody nonsense. And you know why? There's no reason for my father to pull a scam like that. It's not much of a scam. Kathy pulled the hem of her silk robe tighter and sat down in the low armchair. It's not fraud, my little friends. It's revenge. Many years ago, a man was walking through the winter woods, knee-deep in deep snow. He was clearly not dressed for walking. A light jacket would have withstood at most a light, illuminating frost, but not -25 with wind. Jeans and city sneakers, too, were not suitable for wading through the thicket. The man was dragging a kind of sled made of interconnected power branches. The branches were covered with a sweater and a t-shirt, and on this improvised mattress lay a man, his face pale with pain. His eyes were closed, but the man was awake. From time to time he opened his eyes, groaned softly, and moaned in pain. Nothing. He was encouraged by the one in front. "I can smell smoke already. I can smell it from here. We'll soon reach the village, and there someone will give us a lift to the town. Just be patient, just a little longer. Can you feel your legs?" "I feel." "The other one?" "I wish I didn't feel anything. It hurts like hell." "The right one's still okay, but the left one feels like a train ran over it." "Be patient." The first one repeated stubbornly and looked glumly ahead. He didn't smell any smoke, so lied to support the wounded. It was not clear where this forest ended, or whether it would end at all. Maybe they were going in circles. He clenched his teeth tighter and tried to pick up his pace. His blonde hair, visible from beneath his hat, was already crusted with ice. His eyelashes were white with frost. His heart grew more and more stiff, an irrational, almost childlike fear that they would wander through the enchanted forest for the rest of eternity. How does it say in fairy tales? The Leshy, if he wants to amuse himself, will make travelers wander more often, will not let them find the way home. He walked minute by minute, falling asleep on the way from terrible fatigue. Don't sleep, don't sleep. You can't sleep now, you'll fall asleep and won't wake up. In order not to fall asleep, he counted his own steps. 1, 2, bad head, 3, watch your step. The wounded man moved on his spruce sled, and again he gave a long sigh. 4, 5, let's go for a walk. We can't get out, moaned the other one. 6, frost can't eat us. 7, we live to please everyone. We'll both be lost here. Why don't you leave me? Hey, 8, we'll survive without asking anyone. If we both die, who'll raise the children? You, James, don't leave me. Nonsense. We won't die. No forest goes on forever, and they don't go in circles. They haven't made a single turn anywhere. It's all right. The forests here, he remembered from the map, are small, and any one of them could be traversed. There's a village up ahead, exactly 100 miles away. He even imagined a few houses under snowy roofs, smoke billowing so there's people around. People are sitting in the house. Some of them are warming themselves by the stove in felt boots. Some of them are reading a book or maybe knitting socks. And on the windows are curtains in flowers or in peas. It doesn't matter. You can have polka dots. There are patterns on the windows. The frost did it. It's beautiful. What else is there? Oh, pies, of course, baked in the oven. Their crust is ruddy, crispy when you bite into it, and inside the pie it's soft, and the filling is delicious. Potatoes in one pie, potatoes in the other. Let it be egg and onion. And the third one should be sweet. With jam, let there be a third one. Suddenly he stopped and sniffed. No, this time he was not dreaming. The smell of smoke, of warmth, tickled his nostrils pleasantly. So the village was very close. Hold on. He shouted to his comrade, and as fast as he could, he strode forward. After 100 miles, he saw a wide gap between the trees. In front of him in the lowlands, the whole village lay like a palm of his hand. Hey, he shouted at the top of his lungs. People, help! No one answered him, but somewhere in the yard, a small dog yapped a couple of times, and then it went silent. People! The man shouted again. His voice was clearly desperate. But then a heavy door in one of the houses creaked open. Why are you yelling? Do you need help? What is it? How in God's name? Did a truck drive over it? The man in the house they were in had helped to carry the wounded man into the house and set him down on a hard wooden bench. Now he was examining the wounded man's legs, clucking his tongue disapprovingly and muttering something to himself. When he had finished, he shook his head and wrapped the groaning man in a fur blanket. "It was an accident," explained the one who was well. "It's a blizzard at night. The road is slippery. You can't see anything. We would have stopped to wait it out, but we were in a hurry. His son is waiting at home. My daughter is waiting for me. So we overturned. The car caught fire, but I'm okay. My arms and legs are intact. My rib only hurts, but it's from a bruise. But my partner, you can see for yourself." "I can see. I'm not blind," answered the man. "We need to go to town, to the hospital, or he'll die. Help me, we'll carry him to the car together." He came to his senses only in the morning and was surprised to find himself in a white hospital room. His comrade was sitting motionless on the next bed, leaning back on the pillow. Was he dozing? No, not likely. He opened his eyes immediately. "Are you all right?" "William? I'm fine. Are you okay? Should I get the nurse?" "No, are you okay?" "I'm fine. You've had surgery, you'll live, and in time you'll learn to walk again. You had 4 fractures. They had to put you back together. But you got it together, right?" They did. The patient licked his parched lips. So we had Christmas. Why were you in such a hurry?" "Oh, I'm thirsty." "William, it's after the anesthesia. Wait, I'll be right back." The one called William took glasses and a plastic bottle of water from the nightstand. "I'll get you some water. Can you stand up? No? Then let's do it this way." He put one hand under his friend's neck, and with the other he brought the glass to his lips. "Drink, Charles, but don't hurry, you'll choke." Charles drank greedily in small gulps, keeping his eyes on William. "You are, aren't you?" he said, withdrawing his hand from the glass. "You saved my life. You could have left me there, and that would have been it. All the debts, all the bills, everything would have stayed there. But you didn't. I don't have any bills to settle with you." William replied sharply, "No debts either. Not you, not me." "And Nancy?" The name hung in the air and seemed to heat him up. Nancy. They both liked her with her snub nose, her freckles, and her tangled black curls. They'd met at a frat party. Then the whole dorm was buzzing, of course. The session was closing. It was there, in the kaleidoscope of ruddy laughing faces, that he first noticed her. Her stubborn black eyes locked into his, never letting go for a second, holding him fast. William stepped closer to her, short, thin as a cane, wearing someone else's leather jacket. "Who are you?" "Nancy." A cigarette between cheekily smiling lips, black curls ringing her eyes. "Oh, you bastard," someone behind him said quietly. "He's got it in for the guy. That's it. Lights out. She's made up her own mind." William said quietly to Charles in the room, "You loved her more than I did." It was fate. A shadow ran across William's face. Whether it was love or just the madness of puberty and all the vagaries of puberty, he didn't get over it. But then she caught up with him. "Don't go out with her." Someone he knew at the time advised him. "She's got half the city following her around like they're tied up. And her, she only loves herself. Get out of your head before it's too late." He didn't. Things had broken down with his wife before the girl was born, and as soon as the baby was a year old, the couple divorced. Having obtained freedom, the ex-wife went to her homeland. There she was offered a job in her favorite specialty and promised to allocate an apartment. There are not for the child conditions. Sensible, she reasoned. It's cold, and I'll be at work from morning till night. Who'll look after Molly there? Let your daughter stay with you, and I'll keep an eye on her. William didn't mind. Molly stayed with her father. Her mother didn't come often, only a few times, but she corresponded with her daughter regularly. Letters from her came once a week and contained long, colorful descriptions of northern nature and stories about work, about acquaintances. At the end of the letter, Mom always asked her to send her regards to her ex-husband and politely inquired about his health and asked her daughter to take care of Dad. And at Christmas always came cards drawn by Mom's hand. She drew beautifully and could well have been a successful artist. Molly always felt that even though her mom was far away, she was very near. After all, the girl knew everything about her life. William, it seemed, and did not think to resent his ex-wife. On the contrary, often called her, told her a lot about her daughter, and invariably invited her to come and visit and stay for any length of time. Once, when he learned that his ex-wife was hospitalized with pneumonia, he himself went to her, assigning all the cases to assistants, and brought with him the best pulmonologist. After she was discharged, he personally negotiated with his superiors a vacation for his ex-wife and paid for her vacation on the ocean coast. Just to be sure, he sent Molly along with her, and in that he was lucky, Charles thought bitterly. Yes, William's marriage didn't work out, but they had separated like people, friends, you might say, and the daughter remained with her father and mother. And James never knew his mother. Nancy, however, still occasionally appeared in Charles's life. There were, I think, only 3 such episodes. She somehow managed to find his phone number, and she always called at night. The first call was from New York. What was Nancy doing there? That remains a mystery. She called to wish Charles a Merry Christmas. There was a festive, cheerful noise in the receiver. She must have been calling from somewhere on the street. The city was rumbling behind her, bursting with people's laughter, deafening with fireworks, and voices speaking every language in the world were heard from everywhere. Nancy did not want to answer any questions, but she laughed merrily and wished her ex-husband health and happiness. "Why did you run away?" Charles shouted into the phone. "Why did you abandon the child? Do you even know what I named him? Do you know what your son's name is? Don't worry. Everything is fine with me." Nancy spoke dryly and immediately disconnected. A few months later, there was a call from Madrid. Not once did Nancy ask about her son, and she still didn't know his name. Cuckoo, cuckoo, still cuckoo. Bitter, Charles concluded. Forget it. You have a son growing up. Be happy for him. His friend advised him, and it was hard not to agree with him. When the children grow up, they'll get married. William smiled, cradling his daughter. Charles nodded again. That's a good idea, he said thoughtfully. Their fathers are friends. They've known each other since childhood, and love is love, but family is different. Strange, he thought so sincerely. But now, lying in a hospital bed, saved by his best friend and reassembled by the doctors, Charles felt a cold, slithering, snake-like envy crawling into his soul. Is this what William is in for, such inhuman luck? What had he done to deserve it? Fate saved him from Nancy, that's fine. You can explain that by the accidents of love. But what about now? They were traveling in the same car, rolled over together. Only Charles is lying there, unable to get up. And William, not even a scratch. He's a lucky bastard. I couldn't bear to think about it. It made me feel ashamed and even blacker than before. So what? Roughly interrupted James. Unhurried story Kathy. Molly's father saved my life, and he ruined him for that. Do you hear yourself? Not for that. Kathy sighed, but because William, as it turned out, was luckier in everything. He and his wife were separated humanely, no arguments, no quarrels. He was in a car accident, and he didn't get a bruise or a scratch. He was unharmed, and Charles pulled him out. So he's the one for luck. What's this nonsense? Shocked, Molly whispered. Kathy's crazy stories still didn't fit in her head. They couldn't be true. It's all made up. Nonsense. Just because Daddy was luckier. The blonde shrugged her shoulders. Isn't that enough? I, for one, understand Charles perfectly well. Even if you and I are compared, I look at you, you fool, and I don't understand. Why are you so lucky? You were born into a rich family. You've never been denied anything. Your father was so caring. Even introduced me to you as an unknown older sister. Did not want to traumatize his daughter with the message that her daddy beautiful, a mistress appeared, and you have good suitors. Maybe he's a knave fool. I won't argue with that. But he's a good, decent, loyal man, and his pockets are not windy. Am I worse than you in any way? No, not worse, that's for sure. Maybe even prettier than you. And as for brains, there's nothing to talk about. I'm definitely the smarter of the two of us. Do you know where I lived? Do you know where I'm from? No, you don't. You bought that ugly dress in the second hand today, and my sister works in that second hand as a saleswoman. Her husband sits across the street, selling bath brooms. Two twin boys, they send their children to grandmothers and grandfathers and work hard to earn money. And you've never worked a minute in your life, but you've never known need. Everything was brought to you and others like you on a golden platter. Right? But it's not my fault, Kathy. It's not my fault. Molly screamed. Did I take anything from you or your sister? Are you poor yourself? Not poor, not rich, but as it comes. Kathy grinned. I didn't get all this from the sky. I'm not happy with your dads, and I have to pretend to you, my stepsister. But it's better than selling rags in a garage or brooms. Huh, your father always thought we'd be friends, but there's one thing he didn't count on. I didn't want to be friends with you. But you. She sent James an affectionate smile. You could have married me instead of her. Kathy nodded at Molly. How am I any worse? James was silent for a long time. You disgust me. Finally, he said, Molly, let's go. He squeezed his fiancée's hand tightly and turned toward the door. Stop! Kathy shouted, stop! In one leap, as if transformed into a wild cat. She jumped out of her chair and rushed to the door, blocking the exit. You forgot something, my sweet. She purred, but the purr was menacing. You did rape me, didn't you? It was so horrible. She lowered her eyes and pretended to wipe away a tear. It looked pretty convincing. You realize I don't even have to file a police report, right? Just complaining to your dad and your dad's dad would be enough. She looked at Molly. It's scary to think what the consequences could be. That's a lie, said James in an icy tone. Get away from the door. The blonde didn't think to move. But so be it. She said conciliatingly, I won't say anything to anyone if you agree to pay me a small amount of money every month, just. That's enough. You're not making any sense, Kathy. Molly tried to reach for the doorknob, and at the same second, Kathy grabbed the girl's wrist with her sharp fingernails. Let me go, it hurts, Kathy. But the blonde, without loosening her grip, with her free hand, grabbed Molly by the hair. Not so fast, she hissed. James, squeezing between the girls, covered his fiancée with his own. Molly slumped against the wall, her face pressed into her fiance's back. Kathy, shrieking louder and louder, cut into her ears. "Help, help! Call the police! Calm down," James said, panting slightly. "There's been an attack." Safiya continued to shout, "Call the police." Keeping the blonde at arm's length was proving difficult. Kathy scratched and wriggled, hoping to get her nails on Molly. Something glassy fell to the floor with a clinking sound and rolled across the laminate floor. Molly quickly squatted down and grabbed the find first. The vial was small and could easily be hidden in the palm of her hand. The girl glimpsed the label and showed it to her fiancé. "Clophaline," he read it loudly, and then took the vial in his hand and threw it at Kathy. "You're the one who dropped it." Contemptuously, he threw it. The blonde caught the vial and quickly slipped it into the pocket of her robe. "Come on, Molly," James repeated and swung open the front door. "We should go." It was dark in Charles's apartment. William had asked his friend to turn off all the lights. "The light was making my eyes hurt." He explained, "It must be my nerves." They talked in the dark, illuminated only by the smoldering lights of cigarettes. From time to time, long streaks of light ran across the ceiling. Someone drove by with their headlights on. It was tolerable. You could close your eyes, and then your eyes would rest. But now, oblivious to the pain, he flicked the switch himself. Charles squeezed his eyes shut, but William didn't seem to notice the bright beam of light striking his eyes. His face was pale, frightened. "What are you saying?" he asked, shocked by his comrade's words. "What was that just now?" "Is this a joke?" Charles sighed. "I knew Kathy was looking for someone to leak your data to." He repeated, "You know you've got plenty of competitors. Getting to them isn't that big a deal. And they pay for information, and they pay well. All she had to do was choose the highest bidder." "Why would she do that?" "The boil, William. That I didn't give her enough money, kept her full, bought her an apartment. It was enough for all her desires. Did you give her enough?" "Fine." Charles calmed him down. There was enough for a good life, but the girl wanted stability, guarantees. She did not know how to save. It's not in her nature. Marrying you was out of the question, and the years go by. She was afraid that you will play with her, and as her age comes up, you will find someone younger, fresher, and Kathy in circulation on the sidelines of life. So she wanted to be on the safe side to secure her future. Why? William rubbed his eyes. They were starting to hurt again. She didn't tell me, but she could have asked for what she wanted, couldn't she? A bank account, a house, a business. I wouldn't have spared her that. Charles laughed. Women, who the devil can tell when they don't always understand themselves. But she could sell the information, and she wanted it badly. The rumor had already spread among the competitors, and they were all ears. That's when I entered the arena. Made up a pathetic story about how I've been jealous of you all my life because you've always been undeservedly lucky. And so on and so forth. Lying, I hope? Not exactly. Charles shrugged guiltily. I was jealous of you. I was many years ago, when, remember, you dragged me through the woods almost alive. So I had that sin. I was jealous. Even though I was ashamed that you weren't hurt in the accident, that Molly had a normal mother, not a slutty Nancy. I saw her, William said quietly. Nancy. I didn't want to tell you, but I went to Boston last year, and my parents are buried there. I went to the cemetery to worship the graves, and there was a fresh grave. Nancy. I saw the picture on the monument. I recognized it immediately. Someone from her family was there. I think it was a cousin, a second cousin, maybe a third cousin, I don't remember, cleaning up her grave. I asked him what happened. Like her lover killed her, either out of jealousy or just drunk. She's always had a lot of admirers, lovers, and jealous men. At first, I wanted to call you and tell you, but then I thought, why? Only to reopen wounds. We've been strangers to her for a long time, said Charles calmly. She was a spoiled girl with a rotten streak. Well, may she rest in peace. She never even saw her son or knew his name. God be with her. The main thing is that you still have your capital, so you have nothing to grieve about, and the children's wedding is tomorrow. Do you think they'll live together? They will, I'm sure. William smiled and hugged his friend. Meanwhile, James and Molly were walking down the street, holding hands. You know, Molly, said the boy, I really like your dress, I really do, I really do. It's cool. You can say that too. Molly fixed the ruffle on the skirt and laughed. It's a real rag. It's just for mopping the floor. James only gripped the bride's hand tighter, brought it to his lips, and kissed the wrist marks left by Kathy's claws. You are the most beautiful in any dress. He said so quietly that it was almost impossible to hear the words. But the girl heard and smiled at her fiancé, shyly and gently. Then I like it too. Her smile became mischievous. That's what I'm going to marry you in tomorrow. James laughed, picked Molly up in his arms, and shouting loudly how much he loved her, began to twirl her around and kiss her on the lips. Is this really love? Molly closed her eyes and imagined their wedding. They would live in a big house and have 3, no, better 4 mischievous children with whom they would enjoy playing catch-up. 2 happy grandfathers, Molly's father William and James's father Charles.